In a world where beauty was currency and visibility meant survival, Lena Moreau had mastered the art of disappearing. But when her camera lens found Victor Rinaldi across a crowded Mediterranean resort, a man whose dark eyes saw straight through her carefully constructed walls, invisibility became impossible. One photograph, one glance, one dangerous recognition that would unravel everything she'd built to protect herself. Because some men don't just look at you, they see you. And being seen by a man like Victor Rinaldi? That was the most terrifying thing of all. If you're ready to discover how a girl who hid from the world found herself caught in the gaze of the one man she couldn't hide from, stay with me until the very end. And if this story speaks to you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Lena Moreau had learned early that the best way to survive among the wealthy was to become a ghost. At 21, she had perfected the art of moving through crowds without disturbing the air, of standing in corners where light didn't quite reach, of making herself so unremarkable that people forgot she was human. She was the girl with the camera, the one who documented their perfect moments while remaining carefully, deliberately absent from them. It was a survival skill she'd honed over 3 years of freelance photography gigs at luxury resorts, high-end weddings, and exclusive galas. The kind of events where a single glass of champagne cost more than she made in a week, where women wore diamonds that could fund her veterinary education twice over, where invisibility wasn't just professional, it was essential. The Côte d'Azur resort sprawled along the Mediterranean coastline like a jeweled crown, all white marble and azure pools that reflected the endless sky. Lena had been hired for a week-long event, some kind of corporate retreat for people wealthy enough that they didn't need to specify what corporation. Her instructions had been simple: capture the elegance, the beauty, the carefully curated perfection. Don't interact, don't intrude, don't exist beyond the viewfinder. She dressed in black as always. Simple pants, a fitted blazer she'd found at a thrift store but had tailored to look expensive, comfortable flats that wouldn't echo on marble floors. Her dark hair was pulled into a low bun, her makeup minimal. Professional. Forgettable. Exactly as it needed to be. The evening reception was being held on the resort's grand terrace, where the setting sun painted the Mediterranean in shades of gold and crimson. Lena moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her camera an extension of her body. She knew how to find the perfect angles, how to wait for genuine laughter instead of posed smiles, how to capture the moment just after someone thought she'd moved on. Through her lens, she studied the guests, the women in their designer gowns, champagne flutes held just so, the men in perfectly tailored suits, their conversations layered with importance and money. Everything orchestrated, everything controlled. And then she found him. He stood apart from the main crowd near the terrace's edge where the stone balustrade met the deepening sky. While everyone else seemed to be performing for each other, he simply existed, quiet, contained, watching the horizon with an expression that suggested he was cataloging every detail and finding most of it wanting. Lena's finger hesitated on the shutter. He was tall, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that was just slightly too long to be corporate, as if he'd forgotten to care about such things. His suit was impeccable, clearly custom, the kind of tailoring that cost more than her monthly rent, but he wore it with an indifference that suggested wealth was assumed rather than announced. Strong features, olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean heritage, and a stillness that set him apart from the constant motion around him. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Even from this distance, even through the buffer of her camera lens, she could see the weight they carried. Dark eyes that had seen too much. Tired eyes. Careful eyes. Dangerous eyes. She took the photograph before she could talk herself out of it. The shutter click was soft, barely audible over the string quartet playing Vivaldi in the background, but somehow, impossibly, he heard it. His gaze shifted. Found her. Locked on. Lena's breath caught. For 3 years she had been invisible. For 3 years, she had stood behind her camera and documented other people's lives without ever being acknowledged as more than a service provider. She was furniture. She was wallpaper. She was the help. But this man, this stranger with his tired, careful, dangerous eyes, saw her. Not the camera, not the professional photographer earning her paycheck. Her. Lena Moreau, the girl who'd grown up in a cramped apartment above her grandmother's bakery in Marseille, who dreamed of healing animals instead of photographing wealthy humans, who wore borrowed confidence like a too large coat because her real self was too small, too poor, too ordinary for spaces like these. He saw all of it in that single glance. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Not the practiced social smile she'd photographed 100 times tonight, something smaller, private, real. Lena lowered her camera, suddenly aware that her hands were trembling. "You should never apologize for seeing clearly." The voice came from her left, startling her. She turned to find him standing there. He'd crossed the distance between them in the seconds she'd been mentally scrambling, moving with a quiet efficiency that suggested he was used to getting where he wanted without drawing attention. Up close, he was even more devastating. Not classically handsome in the polished way of the men she photographed, but compelling in a way that made her forget to breathe. There was a scar at his temple, barely visible beneath his hairline. Another along his jawline, faint but present, marks that suggested a history that didn't match the elegant suit. "I wasn't," Lena started, then stopped. She'd been about to lie, to offer some professional excuse for photographing him without permission, but something in his expression suggested he'd know. "I should have asked first." "Why?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the same intensity she'd been using on him moments before. "You were doing your job, capturing truth. That photograph you took, I saw your face before you pressed the shutter. You found something worth documenting. I'm curious what it was." His English was perfect but accented, Italian, she thought, though refined by education and travel. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to command attention. Lena gripped her camera tighter, using it as a shield. "I photograph moments. You looked like you were somewhere else entirely. It made for an interesting contrast with—" She gestured vaguely at the reception around them, at the performance of wealth and importance. "With this?" He followed her gesture, his expression unchanging. "You're diplomatic. Most people would call it what it is, theater. Expensive theater, but theater nonetheless, though. I'm hired to document the theater, not critique it. And if you weren't hired, if you could photograph anything you wanted?" The question surprised her. People didn't usually ask her opinion. They pointed her toward what they wanted immortalized and expected her to deliver results. Her artistic vision was irrelevant as long as their champagne glasses were properly positioned and their smiles adequately dazzling. "Animals," Lena heard herself say. "I'd photograph animals. Horses, specifically. There's something honest about them. They don't perform. They just are." Something shifted in his expression, interest, perhaps, or recognition. "You know horses." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I grew up helping at a stable outside Marseille. The owner let me work there in exchange for riding lessons. I learned more from those horses than I did from most people." She paused, wondering why she was telling this stranger things she usually kept carefully private. "I'm saving for veterinary school. Equine specialization. The photography pays better than stable work. So you make yourself invisible to fund becoming visible in a different life." Lena blinked. He'd articulated something she'd never quite put into words, and hearing it spoken aloud made her chest tighten. Yes, exactly that." He was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes still fixed on her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "I'm Victor," he said finally. "Victor Rinaldi." Lena Moreau. She shifted her camera to her left hand and extended her right, half expecting him to ignore it in favor of some European double-cheek kiss. Instead, he took her hand properly, his grip warm and firm and brief. "The photographer who sees invisible things," he said, and there was something almost like approval in his voice. "Tell me, Lena Moreau, what else do you see?" It was a strange question, especially from a man she'd just met, but standing there on that terrace, with the Mediterranean darkening behind them and the string quartet shifting into something minor and melancholic, Lena found herself looking at him, really looking, the way she looked through her viewfinder when she was searching for truth instead of beauty. "I see someone who doesn't want to be here," she said slowly. "Someone who's learned to occupy spaces without belonging to them. Someone who's very good at seeming present while being somewhere else entirely. She paused. I see someone who's also learned to be invisible. Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the recognition of being genuinely understood. And why would someone need to learn that? The same reason I did. Because being seen can be dangerous. The words hung between them, more honest than anything Lena had intended to share with a stranger at a corporate event. But Victor Rinaldi didn't feel like a stranger, and this conversation, quiet and intense and somehow separate from the glittering performance happening around them, didn't feel like small talk. It felt like recognition. Lena! The voice shattered the moment. Lena turned to find her supervisor, Marcus, gesturing urgently from across the terrace. He was pointing at his watch, and then at a group of executives gathering near the ice sculpture, some important photo opportunity she was apparently missing. I have to go, Lena said, already moving. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Victor's voice stopped her. When she looked back, he was watching her with that same quiet intensity. You were right, by the way, about the invisible things. Most people only see what they expect to see. And you? I see a woman who's too intelligent to be hiding behind a camera for much longer. His smile was slight but genuine. I hope I'm right. Then he turned back to the horizon, dismissing her without rudeness, and Lena forced herself to walk away even though every instinct wanted to stay. She had a job to do, bills to pay, a future to fund. Whatever that conversation had been, whatever strange connection had sparked between her and a man whose last name sounded vaguely familiar in a way she couldn't quite place. It was over. Except it wasn't. Over the next 3 days, Lena kept finding Victor Rinaldi in her viewfinder. Not intentionally, or at least not at first, but he was always there at the edges of her photographs, watching the proceedings with that same detached interest, occupying space without claiming it. And he was watching her too. She could feel his gaze tracking her movements across ballrooms and poolside luncheons, through garden parties and sunset cocktail receptions. Not in a way that felt predatory or uncomfortable, more like curiosity, like he was trying to solve a puzzle she represented. On the 4th evening, he approached her again. Lena was documenting a private dinner on the resort's beach, tables set directly on the sand, hurricane lamps casting golden light across white linens, the Mediterranean providing a soundtrack of gentle waves. She was supposed to be invisible, as always, but Victor walked straight up to her as if she were the only person present. Have dinner with me, he said without preamble. Lena lowered her camera, startled. I'm working. Tomorrow then. After you're finished. There's a place in Nice I think you'd appreciate. I don't... She stopped, trying to find the right words. I don't date clients. I'm not a client. I'm barely a guest. I'm here because my presence was required, not because I chose it. He paused. And I'm not asking you to date me. I'm asking you to have dinner, conversation. Nothing more complicated than that. Why? The question came out more direct than she'd intended, but Victor didn't seem offended. If anything, he looked pleased that she'd asked. Because you're the first person I've met in months who sees clearly. Because you know horses and you're funding a future that matters to you. Because when you look through that camera, you find truth instead of flattery, and I'd like to know what else you see. He met her eyes steadily. And because I'd very much like to know you better. But only if you'd like that too. Lena's grip tightened on her camera. Every instinct she'd developed over 3 years of maintaining professional boundaries was screaming at her to say no, to keep this man at a distance where he couldn't complicate the careful life she'd built, to stay invisible. But another part of her, the part that had spent years documenting other people's beautiful moments while having none of her own, wanted to say yes with an intensity that scared her. One dinner, she heard herself say. Conversation only. Conversation only? Victor agreed, and his smile was soft enough that it almost looked like relief. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. I'll meet you at the resort entrance. He walked away before she could change her mind, leaving Lena standing on the beach with her camera and her racing heart and the growing certainty that she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. The next evening, Lena spent 45 minutes trying to decide what to wear. Everything in her small closet suddenly seemed wrong. Too casual, too formal, too obviously borrowed from the professional wardrobe she'd assembled to look wealthy without actually being so. Finally, she settled on a simple navy dress she'd found at a vintage shop in Marseille, paired with sandals and a cardigan against the coastal evening breeze. She told herself it didn't matter what she wore. This was just dinner, just conversation. Nothing that would change anything. But when she saw Victor waiting at the resort entrance in dark jeans and a white linen shirt, casual but still somehow elegant, his hair slightly disheveled from the wind, her heart performed a complicated maneuver that had nothing to do with professional boundaries. "You came," he said, as if he'd genuinely been uncertain. "I said I would. People often say things they don't mean." He gestured toward a sleek black car Lena hadn't noticed. "Shall we?" The drive to Nice took 40 minutes along coastal roads that hugged the Mediterranean. Victor drove with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything, handling the curves with practiced ease while asking Lena about her photography, her studies, her plans for the future. She found herself talking more than she'd intended, about growing up above her grandmother's bakery, about discovering her love for animals at the stable, about the professor in Marseille who'd encouraged her to apply to veterinary programs despite her lack of formal preparation. Victor listened with an attention that felt genuine, asking questions that suggested he was actually interested in the answers rather than just being polite. "What about you?" Lena asked as they entered Nice's old town, where narrow streets gave way to ochre buildings and the smell of the sea. "What do you do when you're not attending corporate retreats you don't want to be at?" Something flickered across Victor's expression. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. "I manage investments, family business, mostly. It's not particularly interesting." There was more to it than that. Lena could hear the careful editing in his voice, the way he'd reduce something complicated into something simple and unremarkable. But before she could press, he was parking near a small restaurant tucked away from the tourist areas, the kind of place locals kept secret. The restaurant was called Le Refuge, the Refuge. It had perhaps 10 tables, all mismatched, with candles flickering in wine bottles, and no menu because the owner simply cooked what was fresh that day. Victor greeted the older man at the door in rapid Italian, switching to French when the owner responded in kind, and Lena realized with some surprise that Victor was known here, not as a wealthy client bringing a date, as someone familiar, someone welcome. They were led to a corner table with a view of the street, where late evening light painted everything in shades of amber and gold. Wine appeared, red, local, poured without ceremony. Then food began arriving. Fresh burrata with heirloom tomatoes, grilled octopus that melted on the tongue, pasta with botarga that tasted like the sea itself. "You come here often," Lena observed, watching how the owner checked on their table with genuine affection rather than professional courtesy. "When I can. Antonio was a friend of my grandfather's. This place has been a refuge in more ways than its name suggests." "Refuge from what?" Victor considered the question while breaking bread, his long fingers careful with the simple task. "From expectations, from a life that was chosen for me before I was old enough to have opinions about it. From the weight of history that has nothing to do with who I want to be." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "From invisibility that's demanded rather than chosen." Lena set down her wine glass, struck by the parallel he'd drawn to her own earlier confession. "Your family wants you to be invisible?" "My family wants me to be exactly what they need me to be, which amounts to the same thing." He paused, seeming to debate how much to share. "I grew up in a world where individual desires were secondary to family obligations, where your value was measured by your usefulness to a larger structure. I've spent years trying to separate myself from that, trying to build something different. But history has roots that go deep." There was pain in his voice, carefully controlled but present. Lena recognized it because she carried her own version, the daughter of a single mother who'd worked herself to exhaustion, the granddaughter of an immigrant who'd built a business from nothing, always carrying the weight of their sacrifices, always wondering if her own dreams were selfish in comparison. "So you manage family investments," Lena said slowly. "But you'd rather be doing something else." "I'd rather be doing almost anything else." Victor's smile was wry. "But some obligations can't be escaped, only endured, or transformed, if you're patient enough." "Into what?" something legitimate, something clean, something I can live with. He shook his head slightly, as if catching himself revealing too much. But enough about family obligations. Tell me about these horses you photograph in your mind instead of wealthy people at parties. The shift was deliberate, steering away from whatever complicated truths he'd been approaching. But Lena let him redirect, sensing that Victor Rinaldi was a man who gave information in careful doses, and she'd already learned more tonight than he probably intended. So she told him about the horses, about Luna, the temperamental mare who'd taught her patience, about Thunder, the aging stallion who'd let her braid his mane while she studied for her baccalaureate exams, about the foal she'd helped deliver during a difficult birth, how she'd known with absolute certainty in that moment that healing animals was what she was meant to do. Victor listened with that same focused attention, and Lena realized with some surprise that she couldn't remember the last time someone had listened to her like this. Really listened, as if her words mattered, as if her dreams were worth remembering. By the time they finished dinner, ending with tiramisu that Antonio insisted they try, along with small glasses of limoncello, the evening had deepened into true night, and Lena had somehow forgotten that this was supposed to be just conversation with a stranger. It felt instead like something she'd been missing without knowing she was missing it, connection with someone who understood what it meant to want a different life than the one you'd been given. On the drive back to the resort, Victor asked, "Would you have dinner with me again?" Lena's first instinct was to say yes. Her second was to remember all the reasons she should say no. But when she looked at him, at his profile illuminated by passing streetlights, at the careful hope in his expression, she found herself choosing honesty over safety. "I'd like that, but I need you to understand something. Tell me. I'm not part of your world. I'm the person who photographs your world and then goes home to a studio apartment with unreliable heating and instant coffee. I'm working 3 jobs to fund an education that might not even accept me. I don't have safety nets or family investments or fallback plans. So if this..." She gestured between them, trying to find words for something that didn't have clear definition yet. "If this is just entertainment for you, something to pass the time while you're bored at a corporate retreat, I need you to tell me now, because I can't afford complications that don't have somewhere to go." Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled the car to the side of the road, not urgently, but deliberately, and turned to face her fully. In the dim light from the dashboard, his dark eyes were serious. "I understand what you're telling me," he said quietly, "and I appreciate your honesty. So let me be equally honest with you." He paused, choosing words carefully. "My world, the one you photograph, isn't mine by choice. I was born into it, but I've spent years trying to extricate myself from it. The life I want to build has nothing to do with corporate retreats or family investments or any of the performance you've been documenting. Then what does it have to do with? I'm still figuring that out. But I know it includes being around people who see clearly, who value truth over appearance, who choose their own paths instead of accepting predetermined ones." He met her eyes steadily. "You said you couldn't afford complications. Neither can I. But if I've learned anything, it's that meaningful things are always complicated. The question is whether they're worth it." Lena's heart was doing that complicated maneuver again, the one that suggested this quiet, careful man was dangerous to every wall she'd built around herself. "And you think this might be worth it?" "I think you're worth getting to know. I think conversations like tonight are rare enough to be valuable. And I think," he smiled slightly, "I think I'd very much like to spend more time with a woman who photographs invisible things and dreams about healing horses." It should have sounded rehearsed, calculated, like something designed to get past her defenses. But Victor's delivery was too simple, too direct, carrying none of the practiced charm she'd documented on wealthy men at 100 events. It sounded like truth. "Okay," Lena heard herself say. "Yes, we can have dinner again." "Tomorrow?" The eagerness in the single word made her smile. "I have a morning shoot, but tomorrow evening, yes." They drove the rest of the way back to the resort in comfortable silence, and when Victor walked her to the staff entrance, because she'd refused to let him walk her through the main lobby where people might see and ask questions she didn't want to answer, he stopped at a distance that was respectful but somehow still charged with possibility. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for taking a chance on conversation with a stranger." Thank you for asking and for listening. That's what conversation is supposed to be, isn't it? Equal exchange rather than performance? Lena laughed softly. You'd be surprised how many people haven't figured that out. I don't think I would be. He stepped back, giving her space. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. I'll pick you up here? Here is perfect. She watched him walk back to his car, watched him drive away, and stood in the warm Mediterranean night wondering what she'd just begun. Because despite her carefully stated boundaries, despite her warnings about complications and different worlds, something had shifted tonight. For 3 years, Lena Moreau had been invisible by design, safe in her carefully constructed absence, protected by professional distance and practical dreams that didn't include emotional risk. But Victor Rinaldi saw her, really saw her. And being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood invisibility from the inside, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Over the next 2 weeks, dinner became a pattern. Victor would appear at 8 o'clock, always punctual, and they'd drive to different restaurants, sometimes in Nice, sometimes in smaller coastal villages, once to a family-run trattoria in the hills where the owner's mother cooked and her grandson served. And everyone seemed to know Victor well enough to call him by a nickname Lena didn't yet understand. They talked about everything. Lena's photography and her frustration with capturing beauty instead of truth. Victor's complicated relationship with his family's expectations and his attempts to redirect their business toward legitimate investments. Her memories of growing up above the bakery, falling asleep to the smell of rising dough. His memories of a childhood split between Milan and the Mediterranean, always aware that he was being prepared for responsibilities he didn't want. What they didn't talk about, what Victor carefully, consistently avoided, were the specifics of his family's business, or why exactly he was trying to make it legitimate. Lena noticed the careful editing, the way he'd redirect whenever she asked direct questions about what the Rinaldi family actually did. She told herself it didn't matter, that everyone was entitled to privacy, that she had her own topics she didn't discuss, like her father who'd left before she was born, or her mother's early death, or the crushing debt she was accumulating despite her careful budgeting. But there was a difference between privacy and secrecy. And Victor Rinaldi, she was beginning to realize, had secrets that went deeper than family drama or complicated inheritances. The revelation came on their 9th dinner together. They'd gone to a small seaside restaurant in Villefranche-sur-Mer, where the tables were set directly on the beach, and the Michelin stars weren't advertised because the locals already knew. Lena had just finished telling Victor about her acceptance letter to a veterinary program in Lyon, conditional on her completing 2 prerequisite courses she couldn't yet afford, when a woman appeared at their table. She was beautiful in that calculated way wealth allowed. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect smile that didn't reach her eyes. Early 30s with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Victor," she said in Italian, her voice carrying an edge Lena recognized even without understanding the words. "How unexpected to find you here. With company." Victor had gone completely still. Not tense, exactly. More like a door closing, his expression shifting into something carefully neutral. "Alessia, what brings you to Villefranche?" "The same thing that always brings me to the coast, family business." Her dark eyes shifted to Lena, assessing and dismissing in a single glance. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" "Alessia Conti, this is Lena Moreau." Victor's voice was polite but cold. "Lena, Alessia is an old family friend." "Friend?" Alessia's smile sharpened. "Is that what we're calling it now?" She switched to English, her accent heavier than Victor's, but still polished. "It's nice to meet you, Lena. Victor doesn't usually bring his entertainment to our preferred establishments. You must be special." Entertainment. The word landed like a slap. "Alicia." Victor's voice dropped into something quiet and dangerous. "Leave. Now." "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm simply curious about your latest distraction." She turned back to Lena, her smile all teeth. "Has he told you about his family? About what the Rinaldi name actually means? Or are you still in the phase where he's pretending to be a simple businessman?" Lena's stomach tightened. She looked at Victor, saw something flash across his face. Not quite guilt, but close. Confirmation that whatever Alessia was implying, There was truth to it. "This isn't the place," Victor said, still in that too quiet voice. "And Lena has nothing to do with family business. Doesn't she? You've been seen together quite a bit. People are asking questions, wondering if this is serious or if you're simply passing time before the wedding announcements." Wedding. The word hit harder than entertainment had. "There are no wedding announcements," Victor said flatly. "There never were. That was your family's fantasy, not mine." "My family's fantasy?" Alessia's voice rose slightly. "Victor, our families have been planning this for years. You can't simply—" "I can. I have. We've discussed this multiple times. The answer remains no." Lena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the sand. Both Victor and Alessia turned to look at her, and she realized her hands were shaking. "Excuse me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need some air." She walked away before either of them could respond, heading down the beach where the darkness was more complete and the sound of waves could drown out the roaring in her ears. Wedding announcements, family business that needed defending, a name that apparently meant something she hadn't understood. Victor found her 5 minutes later. Lena heard his footsteps on the sand, felt him stop a careful distance behind her. "She's gone," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." Lena didn't turn around. What did she mean about wedding announcements? Silence. Then, "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Lena laughed, the sound bitter even to her own ears. "That's the word people use when they mean, I've been lying but don't want to admit it." "I haven't lied to you." "No? Then tell me the truth, all of it." She finally turned to face him, crossing her arms against the evening breeze. "What is the Rinaldi family business, Victor? And who is Alessia Conti to you?" Victor ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Alessia is exactly what I said. An old family friend. Our families have known each other for generations. Her father wanted us to marry, to combine resources and strengthen alliances. I refused. But she seems to think it's still happening. She thinks what her father tells her to think, just like I was supposed to think what my family told me to think." His voice carried an edge of old anger. "I've been fighting this arrangement for 5 years. I thought it was finally settled." "And the family business? What are you managing, Victor? What exactly are you trying to make legitimate?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark Mediterranean. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "My family has been involved in various enterprises for generations, some legitimate, some less so. I've spent the last 3 years working to transition everything into legal investments, real estate, hospitality, import-export that doesn't cross ethical lines. It's been slow, and there are people who resist the changes." "That's not an answer. That's another deflection." "Lena, you said you valued truth over appearance. You said you wanted people who saw clearly." Her voice shook slightly. "So let me see clearly. Tell me the truth." Victor was quiet for so long that Lena thought he might not answer. Then finally, "My family was involved in organized crime. My grandfather built an empire on activities that ranged from morally questionable to outright illegal. My father continued it. When he died 3 years ago, the responsibility fell to me." The words hung in the Mediterranean air, simple and devastating. "Organized crime," Lena repeated slowly. "Like the Mafia?" "That word is more complicated than Americans make it sound, but essentially, yes. The Rinaldi family has connections to various criminal enterprises throughout Italy and southern France." He met her eyes, his expression stark. "I inherited those connections, those debts, those expectations. And I've been working to dismantle them ever since, to transform the family holdings into something I can live with." Lena felt like the sand was shifting beneath her feet. "And you didn't think this was relevant information? When we were having all those honest conversations about truth and visibility and building different lives? I told you my family had a complicated history, that I was trying to separate myself from it. Complicated history is distant relatives who disagree about politics. This is—" She gestured helplessly. "Victor, you're talking about crime families, about illegal enterprises, about a life that's fundamentally dangerous." "A life I'm trying to leave," he said urgently, taking a step closer. Everything I've told you about wanting to build something different, something clean, that's all true. I'm not my grandfather or my father. I don't want any part of their world. But you're still in it, managing it, which means people like Alessia still think they have claims on you, which means, Lena stopped, a worse thought occurring to her. Am I in danger? Being seen with you, having these dinners, am I at risk? No. The victor's response was immediate and emphatic. I've made sure you're completely separate from any family complications. No one would dare. He cut himself off. You're not in danger, Lena. I promise you that. You promise? She laughed again, that same bitter sound. How can you promise anything? You've been lying to me for 2 weeks. I didn't lie. I omitted. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like the same betrayal. Lena wrapped her arms tighter around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. I told you I couldn't afford complications. I told you I needed honesty. And you, her voice cracked slightly, you let me start caring about you while hiding something fundamental about who you are. I'm not my family's history, but you're still connected to it, still trying to fix it, still obligated to it in ways you haven't fully explained. She shook her head. I can't do this, Victor. I can't be with someone whose life includes wedding arrangements with crime families and business dealings I don't understand. I have enough chaos in my own life without inheriting yours. Lena, please. No. She stepped back when he moved toward her. I need you to take me back to the resort, and then I need you to leave me alone. Let me explain. You've had 2 weeks to explain. You chose not to. Tears were threatening now, and Lena refused to let them fall. She'd learned early that crying in front of people gave them power over you. Please just take me back. The drive to the resort was silent and excruciating. Victor tried twice to speak, but Lena cut him off both times. She stared out the window at the dark coastline, at the life she'd briefly imagined sharing with someone who understood invisibility and truth, and felt foolish for believing it could have been real. When they pulled up to the staff entrance, Lena got out before the car fully stopped. Lena, wait! But she didn't wait. She walked through the door without looking back, didn't let herself stop until she reached her small room in the staff quarters, didn't let herself cry until the door was closed and locked, and she was alone with the wreckage of something that had barely begun before it shattered. Victor Rinaldi saw her, really saw her, but he'd also hidden himself, deliberately, carefully, completely. And Lena Moreau, who'd spent 3 years learning to be invisible, had finally been seen by exactly the wrong person. For 3 days, Lena threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on desperate. She accepted every photography assignment offered, volunteered for early morning shoots and late evening events, kept her camera between herself and the world like armor. If she stayed busy enough, moved fast enough, remained professional enough, maybe she could outrun the hollow ache that had taken up residence in her chest. It didn't work. Victor's words kept echoing in her mind during the quiet moments she couldn't avoid. The careful way he'd said, I'm not my family's history, as if repetition could make it true. The frustration in his voice when he tried to explain the difference between lying and omitting. The look on his face when she'd walked away, not angry, but resigned, as if he'd expected this ending from the beginning. She told herself she'd made the right choice, that a man with mafia connections and arranged marriages lurking in his past was exactly the kind of complication she couldn't afford, that protecting herself was smart, necessary, the only rational response to discovering someone had been hiding fundamental truths. But rational didn't stop her from scanning every crowd for his face, didn't stop her heart from jumping every time she saw dark hair and broad shoulders, didn't stop the dreams where they were back at that restaurant in Nice, but this time he told her everything from the start, and somehow it all made sense. On the 4th morning, Lena's supervisor Marcus found her setting up equipment for a poolside brunch shoot. You look terrible, he said without preamble. Marcus had never believed in diplomatic softness. When's the last time you slept? I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on caffeine and spite, which works for maybe 72 hours before the crash. He crossed his arms, studying her with the same critical eye he used to evaluate lighting setups. Want to talk about it? Not even a little bit? Does this have anything to do with the gentleman who's been asking about you? Lena's hand stilled on the camera. What gentleman? Tall, dark hair, looks like money, but wears it uncomfortable. Asked the concierge which events you were working, whether you were assigned to any private sessions. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I assumed you knew him. I don't. The lie tasted bitter. If he asks again, tell him I'm unavailable. Already did. Told him you were a professional, not a social directory. And if he wanted to see you, he should try the normal channels like everyone else. Marcus paused. He apologized very politely and left a message instead. Despite herself, Lena asked, What message? Marcus pulled a folded piece of resort stationery from his pocket. Said to give you this when you seemed ready for it. I've been carrying it around for 2 days, waiting for you to stop looking like you were about to shatter. He held it out. You ready now? Lena stared at the folded paper as if it might bite. Every sensible instinct said to refuse it, to tell Marcus to throw it away, to maintain the clean break she'd made. But her fingers were already reaching, already taking it, already unfolding the heavy paper to reveal Victor's handwriting, neat, precise, European-schooled. The message was short. I understand why you walked away. I would have done the same. But if you're willing to listen, truly listen to all of it, without omissions, I'll be at Le Refuge tonight at 8 o'clock. I'll wait until 9. If you don't come, I'll respect your decision and won't contact you again. You deserve the complete truth. I should have given it to you from the beginning. V. Bad news? Marcus asked, watching her face. I don't know yet. Lena refolded the paper, her mind already racing through possibilities and consequences. Maybe just complicated news. Complicated is better than simple. Simple is boring, doesn't teach you anything. Marcus gestured toward the poolside setup. Finish this shoot, take the rest of the day off. You've been working double shifts all week. Whatever this is, you're not going to solve it while photographing mimosas and croissants. Lena wanted to argue, but Marcus was already walking away, and she realized he was right. She was exhausted, running on empty, using work to avoid making a decision she'd have to make eventually. The question was whether she was brave enough to hear the complete truth, or foolish enough to risk caring again about someone whose life included things she couldn't begin to understand. By 7:30 that evening, Lena had changed clothes 4 times and was seriously considering not going at all. She stood in her small room staring at her reflection, seeing a woman who looked uncertain and young and terrified. The navy dress felt too formal. Jeans felt too casual. Everything felt wrong because nothing could armor her against what this conversation might reveal. Finally, she settled on simple black pants and a cream blouse, professional enough to maintain distance, but not the borrowed wealth costume she wore for work. If she was going to hear the truth, she'd do it as herself. Not as the invisible photographer, not as someone pretending to belong in Victor's world. Just Lena Moreau, who deserved honesty even if it hurt. The drive to Nice felt longer than usual, every kilometer giving her more time to question this decision. She could turn around. She could protect herself. She could choose safety over the risk of caring about someone whose family history included words like organized crime and criminal enterprises. But she kept driving because underneath the fear was something stronger, the need to understand. Victor had seen her, really seen her, in a way no one else had, and she'd seen something in him too. Something beyond the expensive suits and careful control. Something worth knowing, even if knowing it complicated everything. Le Refuge looked exactly as it had during their first dinner together. Warm light spilling from the windows. The smell of Antonio's cooking drifting into the street. The promise of sanctuary, the name suggested. Lena parked down the block and sat in her car for 3 full minutes, gathering courage. Then she got out and walked through the door before fear could stop her. Victor was already there, sitting at the same corner table. He stood when he saw her, relief and apprehension warring on his face. You came, he said quietly. You said you'd tell me everything. I'm here to see if that's true. Lena sat down without waiting for him to pull out her chair, needing to establish that this wasn't a date. This was a reckoning. No more careful editing, no more omissions. If I'm going to understand who you actually are, I need all of it. Victor nodded slowly and sat across from her. Before we start, I want you to know that nothing I'm about to tell you puts you in danger. I've made absolutely certain of that. Whatever else happens, you're safe. Why would I be in danger? Because the Rinaldi family still has enemies, still has debts and obligations that haven't been resolved, and because being connected to me, even tangentially, could make someone a target if the wrong people decided to use you as leverage. His dark eyes were steady on hers. But I've made it clear to everyone who matters that you're completely separate from family business, off limits, untouchable. Lena absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man who'd asked her about horses and listened to her dreams of veterinary school. You had to declare me off limits. To criminals. To business associates with questionable ethics, yes. That's terrifying, Victor. I know, that's why I didn't tell you. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. I know that's not an excuse. I know I should have been honest from the start, but I was selfish. I wanted... He stopped, choosing words carefully. I wanted a chance to be seen as just myself, not as Giovanni Rinaldi's son or the heir to a criminal empire or any of the other labels that define me. Just Victor, and you saw me that way, until Alicia ruined it. Antonio appeared then, setting down wine and water without asking, squeezing Victor's shoulder in a gesture of support before retreating. Lena noticed that this restaurant was quieter than usual, only 2 other tables occupied, both far enough away to give them privacy. Did you rent out the restaurant? I asked Antonio to keep it quiet tonight. This conversation shouldn't have an audience. Victor poured wine for both of them with steady hands. Where do you want me to start? The beginning. Your family, what exactly they built and what you inherited. Victor took a long breath, and Lena recognized it as the moment he stopped protecting himself with careful truths. My grandfather, Lorenzo Rinaldi, came from nothing. Post-war Italy, opportunities were scarce, especially for people without education or connections. He started by running numbers, then moved into protection rackets, eventually building a network that controlled several industries in northern Italy. By the time my father was born, the Rinaldi name meant power and fear. He spoke without emotion, reciting facts like a history lesson about someone else's life. But Lena could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. My father, Giovanni, expanded the business, made connections with other families throughout Italy and France. He was smart about it, invested in legitimate businesses as fronts, cultivated political relationships, made the family look respectable while maintaining the criminal infrastructure underneath. Victor's mouth twisted slightly. I grew up in beautiful homes, attended excellent schools, traveled everywhere. But I also grew up knowing that my father's business partners were dangerous, that our wealth came from activities that hurt people, that I was being groomed to take over something I fundamentally disagreed with. Why didn't you refuse? Leave? I tried. When I was 21, I told my father I wanted no part of the family business, that I was moving to France, starting over, building my own life. His voice went flat. He explained very clearly that there was no starting over, that I carried the Rinaldi name and all the obligations that came with it, that if I tried to leave, he'd cut off every resource, call in every favor, make sure no legitimate business would hire me and no university would accept me. Lena's chest tightened at the casual cruelty he described. He blackmailed you into staying. He made it clear that my choices were limited. So I stayed, learned the business, met with associates I despised, made decisions I hated. Victor met her eyes. And I started quietly working against it, documenting everything illegal I could find, building relationships with legitimate business partners who didn't know the full extent of the family's activities, planning for the day I could dismantle it all. That day being when your father died. 3 years ago, heart attack, sudden, unexpected. Something flickered across Victor's face. Not grief exactly, but complicated loss. I inherited everything. The businesses, the connections, the debts, the enemies, and the responsibility of protecting family members and employees whose livelihoods depended on enterprises I wanted to shut down. Antonio returned with food, simple pasta, fresh bread, nothing fancy. Comfort food. Lena realized this conversation had been anticipated, that Victor had arranged for space and time and the kind of meal that didn't demand attention. So you've been working to make it all legitimate, Lena said slowly. For 3 years. Yes, It's been slow, complicated, and dangerous. People who benefited from my father's operations don't appreciate the changes. Other families see it as weakness. There have been threats, attempts at intimidation, pressure to maintain the old ways. He broke bread without eating it, his movements mechanical. But I've been persistent. I've shut down protection rackets, severed ties with weapons dealers, redirected investments from money laundering into actual real estate development. Every month, we're cleaner than the month before. And Alessia? Victor's expression darkened. The Conti family has been allied with the Rinaldis for 2 generations. When my father was alive, he and Alessia's father decided we should marry, combining resources, strengthening both families' positions. I was told about this arrangement when I was 16. Told, not asked. In families like mine, marriage isn't about love, it's about strategy. I was expected to accept it. He looked directly at Lena. I didn't. I've refused consistently for 15 years. When my father died, I thought the issue was settled. But Alessia's father has been using the transition period, while I'm working to legitimize everything, to push for the marriage again, suggesting it would stabilize things, maintain alliances, prevent rival families from seeing us as weak. And Alicia herself? What does she want? Alessia wants what she's been raised to want: power, status, the security of a strategic marriage. I don't think she loves me. I don't think she even particularly likes me. But marrying into the Rinaldi family gives her father more influence, and Alessia has always done what her father wants. Lena took a sip of wine, processing everything he'd told her. It was simultaneously more and less than she'd imagined, more complicated in the details, less dramatically criminal than movie versions of organized crime, but still fundamentally dangerous in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. What happens if you refuse the marriage permanently? If you tell her father there's absolutely no chance? He'll likely withdraw support, possibly turn hostile. It would make the legitimization process harder, potentially put people I'm trying to protect at risk. Victor paused. But I am refusing, permanently. I made that clear to him 2 days ago, after Alicia confronted us at dinner. Lena's head snapped up. You did? I called him the next morning. Told him I understood his strategic reasoning, but that I would never marry his daughter. That the family alliance would have to exist on other terms, or not at all. His voice was steady but intense. Because you were right about all of it. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I should have given you the choice of whether to be involved with someone carrying this kind of history. Instead, I was selfish and cowardly, and I hurt you. I'm sorry, Lena, truly sorry. The apology landed differently than she'd expected. Not defensive, not trying to excuse his choices, just genuine remorse for the impact of those choices on her. Why did you tell me you managed family investments? Lena asked quietly. Why not just say you didn't want to discuss your work? Because that felt like a lie, and everything else I told you was true. I do manage family investments. I'm just also managing the dismantling of criminal operations. I wanted to give you as much honesty as I could while protecting you from information that might make you a target. He shook his head. I see now that partial honesty is just another form of deception. You deserved better. They ate in silence for several minutes, Lena trying to organize her thoughts into coherent questions instead of emotional reactions. Finally, she asked, what does legitimization actually mean? When you say you're making the business clean, what does that look like? Victor seemed to appreciate the practical question. It means selling off businesses that exist primarily for money laundering, ending protection contracts, severing relationships with smuggling operations, converting assets into legitimate holdings, hotels, restaurants, import companies that operate entirely legally. I'm also working with law enforcement in Italy, providing information about other families' operations in exchange for immunity for our people who are willing to cooperate. You're cooperating with police? Isn't that... Lena searched for the word. Dangerous? Yes. If certain people found out, it could be fatal. His bluntness was jarring. But it's necessary. The only way to truly break free is to help dismantle the system entirely. I've been careful, worked through intermediaries, protected my sources. But there's always risk. And you're doing all this while people like Alessia's father are pressuring you to maintain the old ways. while also dealing with rivals who see the transition as opportunity, family members who resist change, and employees whose livelihoods depend on me making the right decisions. Victor's exhaustion showed through for the first time. It's like performing surgery on myself while running a marathon. Every choice has consequences I can't fully predict. Lena set down her fork, her appetite gone. This is your life. This constant balancing act between legitimacy and criminal legacy, between protection and danger, between what you want and what you inherited. Yes. And you wanted to involve me in this? Someone with no experience with any of it, no protection, no understanding of the risks? No. His response was immediate and emphatic. I never wanted to involve you. I wanted to keep you completely separate. Let you be the one part of my life that was clean and simple and good. Where I could be just Victor, not Giovanni Rinaldi's son or the head of a criminal family trying to reform. He met her eyes. But that was selfish too, because you're not a fantasy or an escape. You're a real person who deserved to know the truth about who I am. Who are you? Lena asked softly. If you had to describe yourself without your family's history, who is Victor Rinaldi? He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same seriousness he'd brought to everything else. I'm someone who's trying to do the right thing in circumstances where right and wrong aren't always clear. I'm someone who values truth, but has learned that complete honesty can be dangerous. I'm someone who wants to build a life that doesn't hurt people, even though I'm still untangling myself from a legacy that's done tremendous harm. He paused. And I'm someone who met an extraordinary woman and selfishly wanted a chance to know her, even though I knew my history might make that impossible. Lena's throat tightened. She'd come here expecting to feel angry, to have her decision to walk away validated by revelations that proved Victor was fundamentally incompatible with the life she wanted. Instead, she was discovering someone more complicated than she'd imagined. Not a criminal, but someone caught in a web of criminal legacy, fighting to extricate himself while protecting people who depended on him. I don't know what to do with all this, she admitted. I don't know how to reconcile the man who listened to my dreams about healing horses with someone whose life includes enemies and threats, and cooperation with law enforcement against criminal families. You don't have to reconcile anything. You don't have to do anything except decide what you're comfortable with. Victor's voice was gentle. I told you everything because you deserved the truth. Not because I expect it to change your mind about walking away. If you decide this is too much, and it would be completely reasonable if you did, I'll respect that. No more messages, no more attempts to contact you. I'll let you go. And if I don't want to be let go? The question surprised her as much as it surprised him. But sitting here, listening to him lay out his complicated reality with unflinching honesty, Lena realized that walking away felt wrong. Not safe, just wrong. Victor's expression shifted, hope carefully tempered with caution. Then we figure out what's possible, but only if you understand the risks. Only if you choose this fully informed. What are the risks, specifically? Association with me could draw unwanted attention. People might approach you looking for information or leverage. There might be times I can't explain where I'm going or what I'm doing because the less you know about certain operations, the safer you are. He held her gaze. And there's always the possibility that despite my best efforts, something could go wrong. Someone could target you to get to me. I've taken every precaution I can, but I can't guarantee absolute safety. Lena absorbed this, trying to imagine her quiet life of photography and veterinary studies intersecting with a world where people were targeted and safety required guarantees. That's terrifying. I know. But you live with it every day. I don't have a choice, you do. Victor leaned forward slightly. Lena, I care about you. More than I expected to, more than is probably wise given my circumstances. But I care about your safety more. If you walk away, you'll be completely protected. I'll make absolutely certain of that. But if you stay, if you decide to try to make something work between us, I need you to understand what you're accepting. And what would I be accepting, practically speaking? Boundaries around what I can share about certain aspects of my work. Security precautions that might seem excessive. The possibility of having to end things quickly if a situation becomes dangerous. He paused. And the reality that I'm still years away from being completely free of my family's legacy. I'm working toward legitimacy, but I can't promise it will be achieved quickly or without complications. Lena picked up her wine glass, needing something to do with her hands. This is insane. You know that, right? I'm a freelance photographer saving for veterinary school. I have student debt and a studio apartment with unreliable heating. My biggest crisis last month was deciding whether I could afford new camera equipment or if I should save for next semester's prerequisites. And now you're asking me to consider being involved with someone whose life includes security precautions and criminal associates, and she stopped, overwhelmed. I know, it is insane. That's why I'd completely understand if you said no. But you're hoping I'll say yes. I'm hoping you'll make whatever choice is right for you, even if that breaks my heart. The admission was quiet, honest, stripped of any manipulation or pressure. Victor wasn't trying to convince her. He was simply being truthful about his own feelings while respecting her autonomy. Lena set down her wine glass and looked at him, really looked, the way she looked through her camera when she was searching for truth. She saw exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, loneliness in the set of his shoulders, determination in the angle of his jaw, and underneath all of it, vulnerability that he was letting her see because she demanded complete honesty. I need time, she said finally, to process all of this, to figure out what I'm willing to risk and what I'm not. This isn't a decision I can make sitting in a restaurant over pasta, no matter how good Antonio's cooking is. Victor nodded, disappointment flickering across his face, but acceptance stronger. Of course, take whatever time you need. But I'm not saying no. I'm just saying, not yet. Not until I understand what yes would actually mean. That's fair, more than fair. He reached across the table, stopping just short of taking her hand. Can I ask what would help you decide? Information, space, something else? Lena considered the question. Honestly, I think I need to see your life. Not the dinners and the careful separation you've been maintaining, the actual reality of what you're dealing with. Because right now it's all abstract, criminal legacy and legitimization and security precautions. I need to understand what that looks like in practice. You want to see behind the curtain? I want to know what I'd be saying yes to. The real version, not the sanitized one. Victor was quiet, clearly weighing her request. That could be dangerous. Not physically dangerous, he added quickly, seeing her expression, but dangerous to your peace of mind. There are aspects of the transition work that aren't pleasant, things that might change how you see me. Good. I don't want to see you through a filter anymore. If we're going to have any chance of making this work, I need to see all of it. Lena's voice was steady, despite her racing heart. Can you give me that? Or is the whole thing too risky? I can give you that, if you're certain it's what you want. I'm certain. Then tomorrow, I'll show you what my work actually involves, the legitimate parts and the complicated parts. The progress we've made and the problems still remaining. He finally took her hand, his touch warm and careful. But I want you to promise me something. What? If at any point you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, or like this is more than you can handle, you tell me immediately. No protecting my feelings, no pushing through because you think you should be able to handle it. Your safety and peace of mind come first. Always. Lena squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses that suggested his life involved more than managing investments from behind a desk. I promise. But you have to promise me something too. Anything. No more omissions. No more protecting me from information you think I can't handle. If I'm going to make an informed choice, I need complete honesty, even if the truth is ugly. Especially if the truth is ugly, Victor agreed. You have my word. They finished dinner in more comfortable silence than Lena would have thought possible, given the conversation they'd just had. Antonio brought tiramisu without asking, along with 2 small glasses of limoncello that tasted like sunshine and regret. When Victor drove her back to the resort, Lena's mind was already racing through everything he'd told her, trying to organize it into something manageable. Criminal legacy, legitimization efforts, ongoing danger, strategic marriage proposals, cooperation with law enforcement. It was too much to fully absorb, too complicated to reduce to simple right or wrong. But underneath all of it was the simple truth that Victor Rinaldi had seen her, had valued her dreams and listened to her stories, and made her feel visible for the first time in years. And now she'd seen him too, Not just the polished surface, but the messy, complicated, morally ambiguous reality underneath. The question was whether seeing each other clearly was enough to build something on, or whether some truths were too heavy to carry together. "Tomorrow," Victor said as they reached the staff entrance. 10 o'clock. I'll pick you up here." "Where are we going?" "To see the life you'd be choosing. All of it." His expression was serious in the dim light. "Last chance to change your mind." Lena smiled despite everything. "I don't change my mind easily. Ask anyone who's tried to talk me out of veterinary school. I'm beginning to understand that about you." He squeezed her hand once, briefly, then let go. "Get some sleep, Lena. Tomorrow might be illuminating." She watched him drive away, then stood in the warm Mediterranean night trying to decide if she'd just made a brave choice or a catastrophically foolish one. Maybe both. Maybe courage and foolishness were closer than anyone wanted to admit. Either way, tomorrow she'd see the truth. And then she'd have to decide if love was worth the risk of visibility in a world she didn't understand. Because that's what this was becoming, despite every sensible reason it shouldn't be. Love. Dangerous, complicated, impossible love with a man who was fighting to escape a criminal legacy while she was fighting to build a legitimate future. And somehow, against all odds and reason, it felt like the truest thing she'd ever chosen. Lena barely slept that night. She lay in her small room staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of Victor's confession, trying to reconcile the man who'd spoken so carefully about criminal legacy with the man who'd listened to her dreams about healing horses. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely and made coffee, sitting by her window watching the Mediterranean turn from black to gray to the pale gold of early dawn. By the time Victor arrived at 10 o'clock, she'd changed clothes twice more and consumed enough caffeine to make her hands shake. He pulled up in a different car than usual, something practical and unremarkable, a dark sedan that could blend into traffic anywhere. When she climbed in, he studied her face with concern. "You didn't sleep." "Not much." Lena buckled her seatbelt, noticing that Victor looked tired too. "Did you?" "No, I kept thinking of ways to explain things that wouldn't terrify you. I haven't found any." He pulled away from the resort, heading inland instead of along the coast. "Last chance to change your mind. We can turn around right now, go have coffee somewhere normal, pretend yesterday's conversation never happened." "And then what? Go back to careful dinners where we don't discuss the elephant in the room?" Lena shook her head. "No, I need to see this, all of it." "All right. Then we start with the progress, the parts that are working, that prove legitimization is possible." He drove with the same quiet competence as always, but Lena noticed how his eyes constantly checked mirrors, how he took an extra turn that seemed designed to confirm no one was following them. "We're going to one of the family properties in Grasse. It used to be a front for money laundering. Now it's an actual functioning business." The drive took 40 minutes through increasingly rural landscape, olive groves and lavender fields replacing coastal villas. Victor explained as they drove, his voice careful and factual. "My father purchased the property 15 years ago, a perfume distillery that had fallen on hard times. He installed management that ran legitimate operations while using the business to clean money from various illegal enterprises. The books were complicated enough that authorities couldn't easily trace the laundering, and the perfume business provided cover for movement of cash and goods." "So you shut down the laundering part?" "Not immediately. First, I had to understand the full scope of what was happening, who was involved, what other operations depended on it. Then I systematically redirected the illegal funds, severed connections to smuggling operations, and replaced corrupt management with people who actually understood perfume production." He glanced at her briefly. "It took 18 months. There were threats, attempts at intimidation from people who lost income when we cleaned it up. But now it's completely legitimate, profitable even." They turned down a narrow road lined with cypress trees, and suddenly the distillery appeared. A beautiful old stone building surrounded by fields of lavender and roses, the air thick with fragrance even from a distance. It looked like something from a tourism brochure, peaceful and pastoral, nothing that suggested criminal history. Victor parked near the main building, where a woman in her 50s was waiting. She had steel gray hair pulled into a practical bun, and the kind of face that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by very little. Lena, this is Marie Dubois. She's managed the distillery for the past year. Victor made the introduction simply. Marie, this is Lena Moreau. She's considering a personal involvement with me, which means she's entitled to understand the family business. Marie's eyebrows rose slightly, but she extended her hand to Lena with genuine warmth. Then you're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which yet. Probably both, Lena admitted, liking the woman's directness. Good. The world has enough people who are neither. Marie gestured toward the distillery. Come, I'll show you what we've built from the ashes of what was here before. The tour was revelatory. Marie explained how the distillery had been barely functional when she arrived, the perfume production secondary to the illegal financial operations running through its books. She'd systematically rebuilt everything, hired actual perfumers, invested in quality ingredients, developed relationships with luxury retailers throughout Europe. Victor gave me complete authority, Marie said as they walked through fields where workers were harvesting roses. He said he wanted this place to be something his grandfather would have built if he'd had legitimate ambitions instead of criminal ones. Something beautiful that didn't hurt anyone. Did people try to stop you? Lena asked. The ones who were profiting from the old system? Of course. I received threatening calls, had equipment sabotaged, found dead animals left as warnings. Marie's tone was matter-of-fact, but Lena's stomach turned. Victor made it very clear that anyone who interfered with the transition would be dealt with. Not violently, she added quickly, seeing Lena's expression, but thoroughly. He has leverage over most of his father's old associates. He used it. They moved through the distillery building, where copper stills gleamed and the air was saturated with rose and jasmine. Workers called greetings to Victor in French and Italian, and Lena noticed they seemed genuinely glad to see him, not fearful. Whatever his father had been, Victor had clearly earned different treatment here. This is what legitimacy looks like, Victor said quietly as they stood in the blending room watching a perfumer carefully combine essences. Honest work, fair wages, products that bring beauty instead of hiding corruption. It took time and money and considerable risk, but it was worth it. How many properties like this do you have? Lena asked. 4 that have been fully converted, 3 more in transition, and 2 that I'm still trying to figure out how to legitimize without destroying the livelihoods of people who depend on them. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. It's complicated. Some of my father's businesses can be cleaned up. Others need to be shut down entirely. The challenge is protecting innocent employees while eliminating criminal operations. Marie served them lunch in her office. Simple bread, cheese, and wine from local producers the distillery worked with. She spoke frankly about the challenges of the transition, the resistance from old guard management, the difficulty of building legitimate revenue streams when you were competing against businesses that didn't have criminal baggage to overcome. But it's working, she said firmly. We're profitable for the first time in the distillery's history. Our perfumes are being carried by major retailers. We're hiring local workers at fair wages and contributing to the regional economy legitimately. She looked at Victor with something like approval. Your father built an empire on fear. You're building something on integrity. It's harder, but it will last longer. If I can finish the transition before someone decides to stop me, Victor said quietly. Who would stop you? Lena asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Victor and Marie exchanged a look. Then Marie stood, excusing herself to check on the afternoon harvest, leaving them alone in the office with its view of lavender fields stretching toward distant hills. There are several parties with interest in preventing full legitimization, Victor said once Marie had gone. Other families who saw my father's network as useful for their own operations. Business partners who profited from the illegal activities. Even some family members who believe I'm betraying Giovanni's legacy by cleaning everything up. Family members like Alessia's father. Antonio Conti is one voice among several. He's not the most dangerous. Victor stood, pacing to the window. There's a man named Salvatore Greco who controlled smuggling operations through several of my father's ports. When I shut down those operations, I cost him millions in revenue. He's been pressuring me to restore the relationship or face consequences. Lena's chest tightened. What kind of consequences? The kind that start with threats and escalate if the threats are ignored. He's made it clear he's willing to target people I care about if I don't cooperate. Victor turned from the window, his expression grim. That's why I've been so careful about keeping you separate. Why I declared you off limits. Greco is the kind of man who would absolutely use you as leverage if he thought it would work. And declaring me off limits stopped him. It established rules of engagement. In this world, there are still codes, boundaries that even criminals usually respect. Civilians are generally off limits unless someone breaks those rules first. He moved back to the table, sitting across from her. I've made it very clear that any threat to you would be considered a declaration of war. And despite everything, I still have enough power that most people aren't willing to risk that war. Most people. But not everyone. No. Not everyone. Victor's honesty was brutal, but necessary. Which is why, if you choose to be involved with me, there will be precautions, security measures, limits on what I can tell you about certain situations. I need to be able to honestly say you know nothing about operational details if someone tries to use you to get information. Lena tried to imagine her life with those constraints, not knowing where Victor was or what he was doing, accepting security measures she didn't understand, living with the knowledge that someone might see her as leverage. It was so far from anything she'd ever experienced that she couldn't quite make it feel real. "Show me the rest," she said finally. "You said you'd show me everything. This is the success story. What about the parts that aren't working, the problems that are still unresolved?" Victor studied her face, seeming to measure whether she was ready for what came next. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but we need to drive to Nice. There's a meeting this afternoon with someone who represents exactly the kind of problem I'm still trying to solve." The drive back toward the coast was quieter than the morning journey. Victor seemed to be gathering himself for whatever came next, and Lena was processing everything she'd learned at the distillery. Marie's casual mention of threats and sabotage. Victor's explanation of dangerous men with interest in preventing legitimization. The reality that declaring someone off limits was necessary because targeting civilians was apparently a possibility. This was Victor's world. This careful navigation between legitimate business and criminal legacy. This constant calculation of risk and protection and consequence. And he wanted to share it with her, not to burden her, but because she'd demanded complete honesty about what choosing him would mean. They reached Nice by mid-afternoon, driving to a neighborhood Lena didn't recognize. Not tourist-friendly, not particularly wealthy, just working-class apartments and small businesses. Victor parked in front of a cafe that looked unremarkable, except for the two men standing outside who tracked their arrival with professional attention. "Security," Victor said, seeing her notice. "Mine. The man I'm meeting also brings security. It's standard for these conversations." What kind of conversation requires armed guards? The kind where both parties need assurance that violence isn't the goal. He squeezed her hand briefly. "Stay close to me. Don't speak unless directly addressed. If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Understood?" Lena nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. This was different from the peaceful distillery, from Marie's matter-of-fact recounting of threats she'd overcome. This was present-tense danger, immediate and real. They entered the cafe, where a few customers sat at scattered tables, and Lena immediately understood that they were all part of the security arrangement. Too aware, too watchful, positioned to cover exits. Victor led her to a back room where a man was already waiting. He was perhaps 60, heavy-set, with the kind of face that suggested he smiled rarely and meant it never. He wore an expensive suit but carried himself with a roughness that no tailoring could disguise. When he saw Victor, his expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, calculation, assessment, barely controlled hostility. Rinaldi. The name came out flat, neither greeting nor acknowledgement. "You bring a woman to business meetings now?" "Lena is here as my guest, not as a participant." Victor's voice had changed, gone cold and controlled in a way Lena had never heard before. "She's learning about family operations. Consider it educational observation." The man's gaze slid to Lena, dismissive and thorough. "Educational. Your father would be ashamed." "My father is dead. I run the family now." Victor pulled out a chair for Lena, then sat himself, completely at ease despite the tension crackling through the room. "You asked for this meeting, Greco. I'm here. What do you want?" So this was Salvatore Greco, the smuggling operator Victor had mentioned, the dangerous man who'd threatened consequences. Lena tried to make herself small in her chair, grateful for years of practice at invisibility. I want the ports reopened. I want our arrangement restored. I want you to stop pretending you can walk away from your father's commitments. Greco leaned forward, his meaty hands flat on the table. You cost me 15 million euros with your legitimacy crusade. That's not a debt that disappears because you suddenly developed a conscience. I didn't cost you anything. You lost revenue when I refused to continue facilitating your illegal operations. That's a risk of doing business in criminal enterprises. Victor's tone remained level. The ports are being converted to legitimate shipping operations. There's no place for smuggling in the new structure. The new structure? Greco's laugh was harsh. You think you can remake the Rinaldi family into something respectable? You think the other families will let you? You're a child playing at reform while the real world continues around you. I'm the head of this family. What I say goes. Until someone removes you, which will happen if you keep making decisions that damage profitable relationships. Greco's smile was ugly. You're not untouchable, boy. Your father had real power because he understood how this world works. You're just a privileged son trying to atone for sins you didn't commit. Lena saw Victor's jaw tighten, the only sign that Greco's words had landed. But his voice stayed controlled when he spoke. I understand exactly how this world works. I also understand that it's changing. Law enforcement is getting smarter, international cooperation is increasing, and the old ways of operating are becoming increasingly risky. I'm offering you a chance to transition into legitimate business before those risks catch up with you. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's pragmatism. I can offer you shipping contracts that are completely legal that will generate steady revenue without the risk of federal prosecution. Or you can continue with smuggling operations that are being investigated by multiple agencies and will eventually result in arrests. Victor paused. Your choice. Greco was quiet for a long moment, his expression murderous. Then he said, very softly, You threaten me in my own city? I inform you of realities you're choosing to ignore. There's a difference. And if I refuse your generous offer, if I decide to make my displeasure known in ways you can't ignore? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lena felt every muscle in her body tense, waiting for Victor's response. This was it. The moment where whatever fragile civility existed would either hold or shatter. Then you'd be making a mistake, Victor said quietly. I've been respectful of old alliances, careful not to damage relationships unnecessarily. But I'm also my father's son. I know how to protect what's mine. If you force my hand, I will respond. And you won't like the results. The two men stared at each other across the table, and Lena understood she was witnessing something primal. Two predators establishing dominance, testing boundaries, determining who would yield. Finally, Greco sat back, his expression still hostile but calculating now, instead of purely aggressive. I'll consider your offer, but don't mistake consideration for acceptance. And don't think your father's reputation will protect you forever. You're making enemies, Rinaldi. Powerful ones. That ends badly. I'm aware of the risks. Victor stood, the movement fluid and controlled. You have 2 weeks to decide. After that, the offer expires, and you'll need to find other shipping arrangements. He guided Lena out of the back room, through the cafe with its watchful security, back to the car. Neither of them spoke until they were several blocks away, Victor's driving more aggressive than usual, burning off tension through movement. That's what the problems look like, he said finally. Men like Greco who see legitimization as betrayal, who are willing to threaten violence to maintain profitable illegal operations, who view my attempts at reform as weakness to be exploited. Lena's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. The barely contained hostility. The casual references to removing Victor, the implicit threat hanging over everything. He called you a child, she said, suggested you're not safe. He's testing boundaries, seeing if he can intimidate me into backing down. Victor's voice was tight. It's a game. Dangerous, but with rules. He won't actually move against me unless I give him no choice, because the consequences would be severe for both of us. But he could. If you push too hard, if you leave him no options, He could hurt you. Yes. Victor pulled over suddenly, parking on a quiet street. He turned to face her fully, his expression raw. This is what I didn't want you to see. This ugliness, this constant negotiation with dangerous men, this reality that I'm still operating in a world where threats are currency and violence is always a possibility. This is why I tried to keep you separate. Lena looked at him, really looked, seeing past the expensive clothes and controlled demeanor to the exhaustion underneath. Victor wasn't playing at reform. He was fighting for it every day, against people with power and no conscience, trying to build something legitimate from the wreckage of criminal legacy. How do you live like this? She asked quietly. How do you function knowing that any decision could trigger violence? Very carefully, with good security, careful planning, and the understanding that some risks are worth taking. He reached for her hand, hesitant. I'm sorry you had to see that. Greco is particularly hostile because I cost him the most money. Not everyone is that aggressive. But they're all out there. All these dangerous men who want you to maintain your father's operations instead of legitimizing them. Yes, which is why I meant what I said about precautions and boundaries. Why I need you to understand that choosing me means choosing this reality. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. I won't blame you if you decide it's too much. If you walk away right now, I'll understand completely. Lena sat in the quiet car on a Nice side street, still feeling the echo of Greco's hostility, still processing the casual way he'd suggested Victor could be removed. Every rational instinct said to run, to choose safety over this complicated, dangerous man whose life included threats and negotiation with criminals and constant calculation of risk. But she thought about Marie at the distillery, talking about building something beautiful from ashes, about Victor's patient explanation of legitimization efforts, his careful protection of innocent employees, his determination to transform legacy into something he could live with, about the way he'd sat across from Greco projecting calm authority while defending decisions that could get him killed. This was who Victor Rinaldi was. Not a criminal, but someone fighting to escape criminality while protecting people who depended on him. Someone choosing integrity over easy profit. Someone building toward legitimate business despite dangerous opposition. Someone worth knowing, maybe even worth the risk. I need to think, Lena said finally, not about walking away, about what staying actually means, what it would look like in practice. Of course. Take all the time you need. But I want to see one more thing first. She turned to face him. You showed me the success, and you showed me the problem. Show me something in between. Show me the normal parts of your life, whatever that means. I need to understand what daily reality looks like. Victor was quiet, considering her request. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but we'll need to drive back toward the estate. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Someone important. They drove for another 40 minutes, heading into countryside Lena didn't recognize. The landscape shifted from coastal Mediterranean to rolling hills, and finally Victor turned down a private drive that led to a modest stone house surrounded by pasture. In those pastures, Lena saw horses, at least a dozen of them, grazing peacefully in the late afternoon light. Her breath caught. You have horses. The family has horses. Or rather, I've been acquiring them over the past 2 years as I figured out what to do with this property. He parked near a stable that looked recently renovated. My father used this estate for private meetings, activities he didn't want conducted in public. I considered selling it, but then I met someone who needed space to heal horses that had been abused or neglected. It seemed like better use of the land. A woman emerged from the stable, younger than Marie, perhaps 40, with sun-weathered skin and capable hands. She smiled when she saw Victor, genuine warmth in the expression. You brought a visitor, she said, looking at Lena with curiosity. Lena, this is Dr. Sophia Bernardi. She's an equine veterinarian specializing in rehabilitation. Sophia, this is Lena Moreau. She's studying to become an equine vet herself. Sophia's expression lit up. Another horse person. Thank goodness. Victor appreciates them but doesn't really understand them. Come, I'll show you what we're doing here. The next 2 hours were a revelation. Sophia walked them through the stable, introducing each horse and explaining their history. A mare who'd been starved by negligent owners. A gelding who'd been beaten until he was too fearful to be ridden. a young stallion who'd been kept in a stall too small and had developed severe behavioral problems. Victor provides the space and funding, Sophia explained as they watched the young stallion cautiously approach for treats. I handle the rehabilitation. Some horses we can heal enough to adopt out to good homes. Others stay here permanently because they'll never fully recover their trust in humans. Lena was watching Victor with the stallion, noticing how patient he was, how he respected the horse's boundaries, how he didn't push for connection but let it develop naturally. This was a side of him she hadn't seen, quieter, gentler, fully present without the calculation required in human interactions. How long have you been doing this? She asked Sophia. 2 years. Victor found me through a colleague after I lost funding for my previous rehabilitation program. He offered this space, no strings attached, just asked that I document the work so he could understand what was being achieved. Sophia's voice was warm with approval. Most wealthy people who claim to care about animals want photo opportunities or tax deductions. Victor actually cares about the healing. He comes here when things are difficult, when he needs to remember why he's fighting so hard for legitimacy. Lena felt something shift in her chest. This was the truth underneath everything else. Victor fighting to build something good from corrupted legacy, creating spaces for healing even while navigating threats, and negotiating with dangerous men. Using resources his father had accumulated through crime to fund rehabilitation for abused animals. Can I help with anything? Lena heard herself ask. I have training in stable management, basic veterinary care. If you ever need an extra pair of hands... Sophia's smile widened. Always. We're short-staffed most days. If you're serious, I'd be grateful for the help. They spent the rest of the afternoon working with the horses. Lena found herself falling into familiar rhythms, mucking stalls, preparing feed, checking hooves and coats for problems. Victor worked alongside them, taking direction from Sophia without ego, clearly comfortable with manual labor despite his expensive clothes. As sunset painted the pastures gold, they stood at the fence watching the horses graze, and Sophia excused herself to finish evening rounds, leaving them alone with the quiet sounds of animals settling for the night. This is what you meant about building something different, Lena said quietly. Using your father's money to heal instead of hurt. It's small compared to the damage that was done, but it's something. Proof that change is possible. Victor's voice was soft. I come here when I forget why the fight is worth it. The horses don't care about my family name or criminal legacy. They just know whether I'm patient and trustworthy. It's honest in a way most of my life isn't. Lena understood completely. This was what she'd been searching for at the stable in Marseille, connection stripped of performance, relationship based on genuine care rather than transaction or obligation. Victor had built his own version of that refuge, creating space for healing while fighting to transform everything else. I'm not walking away, she said, the decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. I'm not saying it won't be complicated or scary or sometimes too much to handle, but I'm not walking away from this. From you. Victor turned to her slowly, hope and disbelief warring on his face. You're sure? After everything you saw today, Greco's threats, the constant security, the reality of what my life actually involves? I'm sure. Because I also saw Marie building something beautiful from your father's corruption. Because I saw how you handle dangerous men without becoming one yourself. Because I saw you with these horses, creating space for healing when you could have just sold the property and walked away. She took his hand, feeling the calluses from stable work. You're not your family's history, Victor. You're what you're choosing to build from it, and I want to be part of that building. He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her with a desperation that suggested he'd been holding himself together through sheer will and had finally found permission to let go. Lena held him back, breathing in the smell of horses and hay and expensive cologne, feeling his heart racing against her chest. I'll protect you, he said into her hair. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe. I know, but we also need to protect you from men like Greco. From your own determination to fix everything alone, from carrying all this weight by yourself. She pulled back enough to see his face. If we're doing this, we do it together. Which means I need to know what you're facing, what risks you're taking, what support you need. Together, Victor repeated, as if testing the word. I've been alone in this for so long, I'm not sure I know how to share it. Then we'll figure it out as we go. But no more omissions, no more protection through information control. Complete honesty, even when it's hard. Complete honesty, he agreed, even when it's hard. They stood in the gathering darkness with horses moving peacefully around them, and Lena felt the future shift into something both terrifying and right. She was choosing a man whose life included danger and complexity she barely understood. Choosing love that came with security precautions and boundaries and the constant awareness of risk. But she was also choosing someone who saw her clearly, who valued her dreams, who was building toward integrity despite every obstacle. Someone worth the gamble of visibility in a world that preferred she stay invisible. The girl who'd learned to hide behind her camera was choosing to be seen by the one man whose seeing mattered most. And somehow, despite everything rational thought suggested, that felt like the bravest choice she'd ever made. The weeks that followed felt like learning a new language while the ground constantly shifted beneath her feet. Lena continued her photography work at the resort, but now her evenings belonged to a world she was still trying to understand. Victor kept his promise about complete honesty, which meant she learned things she wasn't sure she wanted to know. She learned that his phone had 3 different numbers for 3 different purposes, that his security team monitored her movements not to control her, but to ensure she stayed safe, that there were restaurants he wouldn't take her to because they were owned by people connected to his father's old network, that some nights he disappeared for meetings he could describe only in the vaguest terms because the details would make her complicit in ways that could become dangerous. It was exhausting and frightening and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also honest in a way nothing in her life had ever been before. 3 weeks after their conversation at the horse rehabilitation estate, Lena was helping Sophia with evening rounds when Victor's car pulled up earlier than expected. He emerged looking tense, his movements sharp with barely controlled frustration. "What's wrong?" Lena asked immediately, reading the tension in his shoulders. "Greco rejected the legitimate shipping offer. He's made it clear he considers my refusal to restore smuggling operations a hostile act." Victor ran a hand through his hair. "I need to handle this tonight. There's a meeting with several family heads to discuss the situation." Sophia glanced between them. "I'll finish up here. You two go talk." They walked to the far pasture where the horses had settled for the evening, their silhouettes dark against the dimming sky. Victor was quiet for several long moments, clearly organizing his thoughts. "This meeting tonight is important," he said finally. "Greco has been lobbying other families, suggesting I'm weak, that my legitimization efforts are damaging profitable relationships. He's trying to build a coalition against me." Lena's stomach tightened. "What does that mean? A coalition?" "It means if enough family heads agree with him, they could pressure me to step down. Install someone else to run Rinaldi operations. Someone willing to maintain the old ways." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the strain underneath. "Or worse, they could decide I'm too much of a liability and take more direct action." Direct action meaning what, exactly? Victor met her eyes, his expression stark. "Meaning they could try to remove me permanently. It's happened before in families like mine when reform-minded heirs threatened established power structures." The casual way he said it made Lena's blood run cold. "They'd kill you? For trying to make the business legitimate?" "If they saw it as necessary, yes. Though it's more likely they'd attempt intimidation first, escalating only if that failed." He took her hand, his grip warm and steady despite the content of the conversation. "I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but because you asked for complete honesty. This is the reality I'm facing." "What are you going to do?" "Attend the meeting, make it clear that I'm not backing down, but also that I'm not trying to impose my choices on other families. They can operate however they want. I'm only changing Rinaldi operations." He paused. "I'll also make it very clear that any move against me would trigger consequences they won't like. I still have considerable leverage." "Leverage meaning what?" "Documentation of their illegal activities. Connections to law enforcement who would be very interested in certain information if something happened to me. Insurance policies that make removing me more costly than tolerating my reforms." Victor's smile was grim. "My father taught me to always have leverage. I've learned the lesson well." Lena tried to imagine the kind of life where you needed insurance policies against being murdered by business associates, where survival depended on maintaining leverage over dangerous men. "This is insane, Victor. You're describing a world where basic survival requires constant strategic calculation. I know. I'm sorry you have to witness this. He pulled her close, and she felt the tension vibrating through him despite his controlled exterior. But I need you to understand something important. Whatever happens tonight, you're completely protected. I've made arrangements to ensure that even if things go badly, you won't be touched. Documents have been prepared, funds have been set aside. You'll be safe. Stop talking like you're preparing for your funeral. I'm preparing for contingencies. There's a difference. He pressed his lips to her forehead, the gesture achingly tender against the brutality of the conversation. I've survived worse than Salvatore Greco and his coalition. I'll survive this too. And if you don't, if they decide to escalate beyond intimidation, then you take the documents my lawyer will contact you about, you cooperate with the investigators who will suddenly become very interested in Rinaldi family operations, and you build the life you've been planning. Veterinary school, healing horses, everything you've worked for. You don't let my choices derail your future. Lena pulled back to look at him, anger rising through the fear. You think I could just move on, go to veterinary school and pretend you never existed? That's not how caring about someone works, Victor. I'm not asking you to pretend I never existed. I'm asking you to not let my legacy destroy your dreams if something happens to me. His dark eyes were intense. You have a future worth protecting. I need to know that whatever happens, you'll be okay. I'll be okay when you stop planning for worst-case scenarios and start figuring out how to win this fight. She gripped his shirt, holding on as if physical contact could keep him safe. You've spent 3 years working toward legitimacy. You've cleaned up businesses, severed criminal connections, built something worth fighting for. Don't you dare give up now because Greco is throwing a tantrum about lost smuggling revenue. Something shifted in Victor's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic about risks. No, you're catastrophizing. There's a difference. Lena's voice was fierce. You said other families can operate however they want. You're only changing Rinaldi operations. So make that clear tonight. Prove you're not a threat to their interests, just to the criminal legacy you inherited. Give them a reason to support you instead of Greco. Victor was quiet, studying her face as if seeing something new. You're right. I've been so focused on defending my choices that I haven't considered offering them value for accepting those choices. What kind of value could you offer? Information, mostly. I have extensive knowledge of federal investigations targeting various families. I could share intelligence that would help them avoid prosecution while I pursue legitimacy. It would give them a stake in my success rather than my failure. His mind was clearly racing now, strategic wheels turning. If I position it correctly, supporting me becomes more valuable than supporting Greco. And you can do that without compromising your principles? Without facilitating criminal activity? I'm not helping them commit crimes. I'm helping them avoid consequences for crimes they're already committed. There's a difference, morally ambiguous as it may be. He pulled his phone out, already typing messages. This could work. If I handle the presentation correctly, I can shift the entire dynamic of the meeting. Lena watched him transform from worried to strategically engaged, saw the sharp intelligence that had kept him alive in this dangerous world clicking into place. This was Victor Rinaldi, the family head, the man negotiating with criminals, the strategist her father had trained despite all his efforts to reject that training. I need to make some calls, he said, already moving toward his car. Lena, He stopped, turning back. Thank you. For seeing a solution I was too close to the problem to recognize. For not accepting that worst-case scenarios are inevitable. That's what partners do. We help each other see clearly when fear makes us blind. She followed him to the car. What time is the meeting? 9 o'clock. I should be done by 11. I'll wait up. Text me when it's over so I know you're safe. He kissed her then, urgent and grateful, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. When he pulled away, his eyes were fierce. When this is over, when I've neutralized Greco and secured the coalition's support, I'm taking you somewhere far from all of this. Somewhere we can be just Victor and Lena, no families or legacies or strategic negotiations. I'll hold you to that. Lena touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. Now, go win your fight. I'll be here when you get back. She watched him drive away, then stood in the darkening evening trying to calm her racing heart. Sophia emerged from the stable, took one look at Lena's face, and handed her a curry comb. Come on. Physical work helps when your mind won't stop spinning. The gelding needs grooming, and you need distraction. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of caring for horses providing exactly the grounding Lena needed. Finally, Sophia said quietly, "He's gotten through worse situations than angry smugglers. Victor's smart and careful and better at this game than people give him credit for." You know about the meeting? I know enough. Victor comes here when he's strategizing difficult situations, uses the quiet to think clearly. Sophia moved to the next stall. He's different since he met you, more willing to believe things can work out instead of just preparing for failure. That's a good sign. I'm terrified I'm going to get a call saying something went wrong. That's what loving someone in Victor's position feels like. The fear doesn't go away, you just learn to function alongside it. Sophia's voice was gentle. But he's fought this fight for 3 years and won more battles than he's lost. Have faith in his ability to navigate dangerous situations. He's earned that faith. Lena tried to hold on to those words as the evening stretched into night. She helped Sophia finish rounds, then sat in the stable office pretending to read veterinary journals while actually checking her phone every 3 minutes. 9 o'clock came and went. 9:30. 10. At 10:45, her phone buzzed with a text. Meeting went better than expected. Greco isolated. Coalition supportive of continued legitimization. Heading back now. Are you still at the estate? Relief flooded through her so intensely she had to blink back tears. She typed quickly. Still here. Waiting. Victor arrived 20 minutes later looking exhausted but satisfied. Lena met him outside and he pulled her into an embrace that spoke of battles fought and narrowly won. Tell me everything, she said against his chest. They sat on the fence watching horses move in the moonlit pasture, and Victor recounted the meeting in careful detail. He'd started by acknowledging Greco's concerns, then systematically demonstrated how continued legitimization actually benefited other families by reducing law enforcement attention on the entire network. He'd offered specific intelligence about federal investigations, providing value that made supporting him more attractive than opposing him. By the end, Greco was the only voice arguing for aggressive response, and even his allies were backing away from direct confrontation. So it's over? He's not a threat anymore? He's a diminished threat. Still angry, still looking for ways to undermine me. But without coalition support, his options are limited. Victor's arm tightened around her shoulders. And I made something else very clear tonight. Anyone who targets you or uses you as leverage will face immediate retaliation from not just me, but from the families who've agreed to support legitimization. You're not just protected by me anymore. You're protected by consensus. Lena absorbed this information, trying to understand what it meant that criminal families had collectively agreed she was off limits. I'm not sure whether to be grateful or horrified. Both reactions are valid. Victor's smile was tired. But you're safer now than you were this morning. That's what matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the adrenaline of the evening gradually fading into bone-deep exhaustion. Finally, Lena said, You promised me somewhere far from all of this. When were you thinking? How does this weekend sound? I have a friend with a cottage in the Alps. No family business, no strategic meetings, no phones except for emergencies. Just us and mountains and time to remember why we're fighting for this. That sounds perfect. But the weekend never happened. 2 days later, everything changed in a way none of Victor's careful planning could have anticipated. Lena was at the rehabilitation estate helping Sophia with a new arrival. A mare who'd been seized from an illegal racing operation, malnourished and terrified, when Victor's security head called her directly. Miss Moreau, there's been an incident. Victor is safe, but he needs you at the Nice estate immediately. I'm sending a car. Her blood went cold. What kind of incident? Better discussed in person. The car will be there in 10 minutes. The drive to Nice felt endless. Lena's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Despite the security head's assurance that Victor was safe, the urgency suggested something serious had happened. The Nice estate was a property she'd visited only once before, a converted villa that served as Victor's primary residence when he wasn't traveling. Security was heavier than usual. armed guards at the gate who checked her identification before waving the car through. Victor met her at the door looking unharmed but shaken. Before she could ask questions, he pulled her into a private study and closed the door. There was an attempt this afternoon, not against me, against one of the horses at the rehabilitation estate. Someone poisoned the water supply in the new mare's stall. Lena's stomach dropped. The mare we just brought in? Is she... She's alive. Sophia caught it early, noticed something was wrong with the water before the mare drank much. She's being treated by an emergency veterinarian now. Victor's voice was tight with controlled fury. But the message is clear. This was meant as a warning that even protected targets aren't completely safe. Greco. Almost certainly. He couldn't move against you directly without triggering retaliation, so he went after something you care about, something that would hurt you emotionally without technically violating the protection agreement. Victor's hands clenched into fists. It's a coward's move, but an effective one. Lena felt rage rising through the fear. He tried to kill a horse that's already been abused and traumatized just to send a message? What kind of person does that? The kind who's running out of options and getting desperate. The kind who needs to demonstrate he still has power even after being isolated by the coalition. Victor moved to the window, staring out at the gardens. I'm handling it. Greco will face consequences for this violation. But Lena, I need you to understand something. What? This is what it means to be connected to me. Even with protections, even with coalition support, there are people willing to find creative ways to hurt you. The horse was a warning. Next time it could be something worse. He turned to face her, his expression anguished. I can't guarantee your absolute safety. I thought I could, but Greco just proved there are always vulnerabilities I can't anticipate. Lena crossed to him, taking his face in her hands. Stop. Stop looking for reasons to push me away. This isn't your fault. It's Greco's. And we're going to make sure he faces consequences that prevent him from trying anything like this again. How? If I retaliate directly, I violate the same rules he just violated. I lose moral high ground and coalition support. So we don't retaliate directly. We make sure the coalition understands this violated the spirit of their protection agreement. We document everything and share it with the families who agreed to support legitimization. We turn Greco's cowardly move into evidence that he can't be trusted to respect any boundaries. Lena's voice was fierce. And then we make sure every horse at that estate has security measures that would make Fort Knox jealous. We don't let him win by making us afraid. Victor studied her face, something like awe in his expression. You're not running. After everything, after Greco tried to kill a horse just to hurt you, you're not running. Of course I'm not running. I'm angry. I want that mare to recover and I want Greco to face consequences. And I want you to stop assuming I'm going to abandon you the moment things get difficult. She pulled him close, feeling his heart racing against her chest. I chose this, Victor. I chose you, with full knowledge of what that meant. One desperate criminal's cruel message doesn't change that choice. He held her tightly, and she felt something shift in him, a letting go of the expectation that she'd eventually leave, a cautious acceptance that maybe she actually meant what she said about staying. I need to go to the estate, Lena said. I need to see the mare, help Sophia however I can. I'll take you, but there's something I need to do first. Victor pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. I'm calling an emergency coalition meeting. Greco crossed a line. The families need to know. The meeting happened that evening at a neutral location, a private club in Cannes that apparently served as common ground for family heads. Lena wasn't allowed in the meeting itself, but she waited in an adjacent room with Sophia, who'd driven from the estate to provide veterinary testimony about the poisoning attempt. The mare is stable, Sophia reported quietly. She'll recover fully with proper treatment. But you were right. This was deliberate. Someone with knowledge of equine biology chose a poison that would cause suffering before death. They wanted maximum cruelty. Lena felt sick. The casual evil of it, targeting an animal that had already endured abuse, using its suffering as a message, revealed something fundamentally broken in Greco's character. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Victor finally emerged, his expression was grim but satisfied. Greco has been sanctioned by the coalition. He's lost protection and support. If he makes any further moves against Rinaldi interests or associated parties, He'll face unified retaliation from multiple families. Victor's voice was flat with exhausted victory. He's effectively neutered, still angry, still capable of causing problems, but without the power structure to back him up. Will he retaliate for being sanctioned? He might try, but it would be suicidal at this point. He knows it. Victor took Lena's hand. The coalition also agreed to fund enhanced security at the rehabilitation estate. Guards, cameras, monitoring systems for all water and feed supplies. Sophia will have everything she needs to protect the horses. Sophia nodded approvingly. I'll make sure nothing like this happens again. Those horses have suffered enough. They drove back to the estate together, arriving near midnight to find the emergency veterinarian still monitoring the mare. She was standing now, looking weak but alert, and when Lena approached her stall, she nickered softly. She's a fighter, the veterinarian said. Poison like this should have killed her within hours, but she's got a will to survive. Give her another 48 hours, and she'll be past the worst. Lena stayed at the estate that night, sleeping in Sophia's guest room but waking every few hours to check on the mare. Victor stayed too, sitting with her during the quiet pre-dawn checks, both of them keeping vigil over a horse that had somehow become symbolic of everything they were fighting for. As sunrise painted the stable in shades of gold, the mare finally relaxed enough to lie down and sleep. Lena and Victor stood at her stall watching her breathe, and Victor said quietly, I'm naming this place, the rehabilitation estate. It needs a proper name. What are you thinking? Refuge, like the restaurant where we had our first honest conversation, a place where healing is possible despite history. He turned to her. If that's all right with you. It's perfect. Lena leaned against him, exhausted and angry, and somehow more certain than ever that this was where she belonged. Refuge for horses who've been hurt, and for people trying to build something better from broken foundations. For both, Victor agreed, for all of us trying to prove that transformation is possible. Over the next week, security upgrades transformed the estate. Cameras appeared at every entrance. Guards rotated through regular patrols. Water and feed supplies were tested multiple times daily. It was excessive and expensive and absolutely necessary, because Greco's attempt had proven that protection required constant vigilance. But through it all, the work continued. The mare recovered fully, eventually trusting Sophia enough to allow handling. 2 more abused horses arrived, rescued from situations that made Lena's heart ache. And slowly, carefully, the estate became exactly what Victor had envisioned, a place where healing happened despite the darkness trying to intrude. Lena found herself spending more time at Refuge than at the resort. Her photography assignments became secondary to the work that actually mattered, helping Sophia rehabilitate traumatized animals, learning advanced veterinary techniques, building toward the future she'd always wanted but had thought impossibly far away. Marcus noticed, of course. 3 weeks after the poisoning incident, he called her into his office. Your contract ends next month. I'm prepared to offer renewal, but I get the sense your attention is elsewhere these days. Lena started to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. I'm not criticizing. I'm observing. You've been one of my best photographers for 3 years, but lately you're going through the motions. Your heart is with those horses and that veterinarian teaching you equine rehabilitation. He smiled slightly, and possibly with a certain gentleman who looks at you like you're the only real thing in his complicated life. I'm sorry, Marcus. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize for growing beyond a job that was always meant to be temporary. You've learned what you needed here. Now you're ready for what comes next. He pulled an envelope from his desk. Final paycheck plus a bonus for 3 years of excellent work, and a reference letter if you need it for veterinary school applications. Lena took the envelope, touched by his matter-of-fact kindness. Thank you. For everything. For teaching me about professional photography. For being honest when I needed it. For understanding when it was time to let go. That's what good supervisors do. We prepare people for futures beyond our organizations. Marcus stood, extending his hand. Go heal horses and build a life with that complicated man of yours. You've earned it. That evening, Lena told Victor about leaving the resort. They were at Refuge, watching the horses settle for the night, and his reaction surprised her. I'm glad. You were wasting your talent photographing champagne glasses. He pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. But this means your income drops to nothing. Let me help. I can... No. Lena's response was immediate and firm. I appreciate the offer, but I need to fund my own future. Otherwise, I'll always wonder if I achieved it or if you bought it for me. That's pride talking. That's self-respect talking. There's a difference. She turned to face him. I have savings. Sophia is paying me for the rehabilitation work. I'll find another photography job if I need to, but I won't take money from you just because it's available. That's not how equal partnerships work. Victor was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. Old habits from a world where money solves most problems. He kissed her forehead. But if you need anything, equipment, books, emergency funds, you'll tell me? Not as charity, but as partnership? As partnership, yes. When I actually need help, I'll ask for it. Fair enough. He smiled, genuine and warm. You know, watching you stand up to me about this is incredibly attractive. Most people in my life just accept whatever I offer. Most people in your life are probably smart enough to take advantage of your wealth. I'm apparently stubborn enough to insist on earning my own way. Lena laughed softly. We're both a little bit crazy. Probably, but it works. And somehow, despite everything, despite Greco's threats and coalition politics and the constant undercurrent of danger, it did work. They built a rhythm that acknowledged both the complications of Victor's world and Lena's determination to maintain her own identity. Dinners when his schedule allowed. Nights at Refuge when she was too exhausted from rehabilitation work to drive back to her apartment. Quiet mornings where they drank coffee and talked about futures that seemed increasingly possible. The mare that Greco had tried to poison, Lena started calling her Phoenix because she'd risen from the ashes of cruelty, became a symbol of everything they were building. Against all odds, against people who wanted to see transformation fail, they were creating something worth protecting, something beautiful from corrupted legacy, something that proved healing was possible even after terrible harm. And standing in the stable watching Phoenix greet the dawn with calm eyes instead of fearful ones, Lena understood that she wasn't hiding behind her camera anymore. She wasn't invisible or carefully distant or protecting herself through strategic absence. She was seen, fully, completely, dangerously seen by a man whose own visibility carried tremendous risk. And being seen, choosing to be seen, despite every complication that came with it, felt like the most honest thing she'd ever done. 2 months after Phoenix's recovery, Lena received her acceptance letter to the veterinary program in Lyon. She was in the stable office when it arrived via email, and her hands shook so badly she had to read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Conditional acceptance pending completion of 2 prerequisite courses. Start date? September, 6 months away. It was everything she'd worked toward for years, everything she'd photographed champagne glasses and borrowed confidence and made herself invisible to achieve. The future she'd been building long before Victor Rinaldi walked into her viewfinder. And now that it was real, all she could think about was how it would change everything she'd built with him. Sophia found her sitting motionless at the desk, staring at the screen. Good news or bad news? You look like you've seen a ghost. I got in. Lyon's veterinary program. Conditional acceptance. Lena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. I got in. Sophia's face lit up with genuine delight. That's wonderful. Lena, that's incredible news. You've worked so hard for this. Then she paused, reading something in Lena's expression. Why do you look terrified instead of excited? Because Lyon is 3 hours from here. Because the program is intensive and demanding and won't leave room for weekend visits or maintaining a relationship with someone whose life is complicated enough without long distance added to it. Lena pressed her palms against her eyes. Because I'm finally getting what I wanted, and I'm terrified it means losing what I didn't know I needed. Have you told Victor yet? No, I just got the email 5 minutes ago. Then tell him. Before you spiral into worst-case scenarios, talk to the man you love and see what he thinks. Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. You might be surprised. But Lena knew she wouldn't be surprised. She'd seen how Victor's world worked. The constant demands, the strategic meetings, the security requirements that made simple things complicated. A relationship that was already challenging would become nearly impossible with 3 hours of distance and a veterinary program that would consume most of her time and energy. She found Victor at Refuge that evening, working with one of the newer arrivals, a gelding who'd been beaten so badly he flinched at any sudden movement. Victor was being patient, letting the horse set the pace, offering treats without expectation. It was the side of him Lena loved most, the gentleness underneath all the strategic calculation. "I got my acceptance letter," she said without preamble. "Lyon, the veterinary program. I start in September if I complete the prerequisites." Victor went very still, his hand frozen halfway to offering the gelding a carrot. Then he turned to her, and his smile was genuine even though something complicated moved behind his eyes. "Lena, that's incredible. You did it. Everything you've been working toward. It's in Lyon, 3 hours away. I know where Lyon is." He came to her, taking her hands in his. "This is what you've wanted since before we met. This is your dream." "I know. But now there's also this, us, refuge, everything we've built together." She searched his face, looking for some indication of what he was feeling beneath the careful support. "And I don't know how to choose between the future I planned and the present I didn't expect." Victor was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "You don't have to choose. We'll make it work. Long distance, weekend visits when your schedule allows, phone calls when it doesn't. People maintain relationships across distance all the time. People who don't have security concerns and coalition politics and former smugglers holding grudges. Victor, your life requires proximity. How can I be your partner if I'm 3 hours away learning equine anatomy and surgical techniques? You'll be my partner by pursuing your dreams while I pursue legitimization, by building toward the future we both want instead of sacrificing your goals for my complications." His grip tightened slightly. "Lena, I won't be the reason you don't become a veterinarian. I refuse to be that person in your life." "What if the distance breaks us? What if we try to maintain this and it just slowly falls apart because we're not physically present in each other's lives? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. But we don't make decisions based on fear of what might go wrong." Victor pulled her close, and she felt his heart beating against her cheek. "You're going to Lyon. You're going to become the equine veterinarian you've always wanted to be. And I'm going to support that in every way I can, even if it means fewer dinners and more phone calls and learning to miss you." Lena wanted to believe it could be that simple, but she'd seen enough of Victor's world to know that distance created vulnerabilities, that maintaining relationships required the kind of consistent presence their situations might not allow. "I'm scared," she admitted against his chest. "I'm scared of losing this, of losing you. I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of you resenting me in 5 years because you gave up veterinary school to stay close to my complicated life. That would destroy us faster than any distance." He kissed the top of her head. "We'll figure it out, Lena. Together. Like we've figured out everything else." She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this was different from previous challenges they'd navigated. But standing there in the stable with horses settling around them and Victor holding her like she was something precious worth protecting, Lena made herself believe that maybe love was enough to bridge whatever distance September would bring. The prerequisite courses started 2 weeks later, intensive summer sessions designed to compress semester-long material into 8-week blocks. Lena threw herself into studying with the same determination she'd brought to photography and stable work, spending long days at the university in Nice and longer nights reviewing anatomy diagrams and chemical formulas. Victor adjusted his schedule to match hers when possible, showing up at her apartment with takeout and quiet company while she studied, never demanding attention, but simply being present. It was during one of those quiet evenings that everything changed again. Lena was memorizing bone structures when Victor's phone buzzed with an urgency that made him immediately tense. He read the message, his expression going carefully blank in a way she'd learned meant trouble. "What's wrong?" "Greco. He's been arrested. Federal authorities raided his operations this morning, caught him with enough evidence to ensure prosecution." Victor's voice was neutral, but she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. "He's claiming I set him up, that I provided information to federal investigators as retaliation for the coalition sanctions." "Did you?" "No, I've been cooperating with investigators about other families' operations, but not Greco's. I wanted him neutered, not prosecuted." He stood, pacing to her small window. "But he won't believe that. He'll assume I violated the understanding that we don't use law enforcement against each other. And if he convinces enough people that I broke that rule, the coalition will turn against you. Possibly. Or at least withdraw support, leaving me vulnerable to whoever wants to take advantage of perceived weakness. Victor ran a hand through his hair. I need to handle this immediately. Call an emergency meeting, provide evidence that I wasn't involved in Greco's arrest, make sure everyone understands the distinction between general cooperation and targeted prosecution. When? Tonight. The meeting is already being arranged. He turned to her, conflict evident on his face. I'm sorry. I know you're studying. I know this is terrible timing. Stop. Go handle it. I'll be here when you're done. Lena stood, crossing to him. This is your world. I understand that. Go do what you need to do. He kissed her hard, grateful and worried, then left with the kind of swift efficiency that suggested how serious the situation was. Lena tried to return to studying, but her mind kept circling back to Greco sitting in federal custody, angry and looking for someone to blame, willing to destroy Victor's carefully built legitimacy just for revenge. The meeting went past midnight. Lena finally gave up on studying around 1 in the morning and was making coffee when Victor's text came through. Coalition accepts that I wasn't involved in Greco's arrest, but there are questions about my continued cooperation with investigators. Need to discuss. Can I come over? She texted back immediately. Of course. He arrived 20 minutes later looking exhausted and frustrated. Lena handed him coffee and waited for him to organize his thoughts. The good news is they believe I didn't target Greco specifically. The bad news is several family heads are uncomfortable with my ongoing cooperation with federal investigators. They're worried I'll eventually provide information about their operations. Victor's voice was flat with exhaustion. They want assurances I won't, and I can't give those assurances without compromising the legitimization work. What happens if you refuse to give assurances? They withdraw support, maybe actively work against me. At minimum, they stop respecting the protections we've established. He set down his coffee untouched. Lena, this could get dangerous again. Not immediately, but if the coalition fractures, all the work I've done to create stability becomes vulnerable. She absorbed this information, trying to understand the full implications. You're saying we might be back to dealing with people like Greco trying to undermine you through threats and intimidation. Possibly. I'll know more in the next few days as I gauge reactions and figure out who's genuinely concerned versus who's looking for excuses to challenge my authority. He finally looked at her directly. And I need to be honest with you about something else. If things do become unstable again, it might be better if you're in Lyon, further from immediate danger, focused on school, instead of worrying about coalition politics. You're trying to make September sound like good timing. I'm trying to make September sound like the safe choice. If you're 3 hours away and fully occupied with veterinary studies, you're less vulnerable to whatever fallout might happen from this situation. His expression was carefully neutral. I know that sounds like I'm pushing you away. I'm not. I'm being practical about your safety. Lena set down her own coffee, anger and fear warring in her chest. Stop doing that. Stop using my safety as justification for distance. If the situation becomes dangerous, we handle it together. That was the agreement. The agreement was made when I thought I had coalition support secured. The situation is changing. So we adapt. We don't retreat to separate corners, and hope distance keeps me safe. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Victor, I understand you want to protect me, but I'm not a China doll that shatters when things get complicated. I chose this relationship knowing it came with risks. Those risks changing doesn't mean I'm going to run away. Even if staying puts you in danger, even then, because partners face danger together, they don't split up at the first sign of trouble. Her voice softened. I'm going to Lyon in September because it's my dream, and you're right that I need to pursue it. But I'm not going as an escape from your complicated life. I'm going as someone building a future that I fully intend to share with you. Do you understand the difference? Victor pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that suggested he'd been more worried than he'd let on. I understand. I'm sorry. I'm not used to having someone who chooses to stay instead of leaving at the first opportunity. Well, get used to it. Because I'm apparently stubborn enough to insist on being your partner, even when you try to protect me by pushing me away. Lena pulled back enough to see his face. Now tell me what actually happens next. Not the version where you handle everything alone. The version where we figure it out together. Over the next several hours, they planned. Victor would spend the coming weeks rebuilding coalition confidence, demonstrating that his cooperation with investigators was limited and strategic, proving he could be trusted not to betray family interests unnecessarily. Lena would finish her prerequisite courses and prepare for Lion. They'd maintain constant communication, share information about any concerning developments, and operate as actual partners instead of Victor trying to shoulder everything alone. It wasn't perfect. It didn't eliminate the danger or the complications. But it was honest, and after everything they'd been through, honesty felt more valuable than safety. The summer passed in a blur of studying and coalition politics and careful navigation of shifting alliances. Victor managed to stabilize most relationships, though a few families remained suspicious enough to limit cooperation. Greco stayed in federal custody, his trial scheduled for the following year, his threats reduced to angry letters his lawyer was advised to stop sending. In Phoenix, the mare who'd survived poisoning progressed enough in her rehabilitation that Sophia declared her ready for adoption to a carefully vetted home. Watching the mare load into a trailer bound for a sanctuary where she'd spend the rest of her life safe and cared for felt like victory. Proof that transformation was possible even after terrible harm. September arrived with the kind of golden Mediterranean light that made everything feel significant. Lena packed her small apartment, loaded her car with belongings and textbooks in cautious hope. Victor helped, carrying boxes and making sure she had everything she needed for the next phase of her life. The night before she left for Lyon, they went to refuge one last time. The estate was quiet in the late evening, horses settled for the night, Sophia having tactfully made herself scarce to give them privacy. "I've been thinking," Victor said as they stood at the fence watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "About after you graduate. About what comes next." "That's 3 years away. A lot can change in 3 years." "I know, but some things won't change. My feelings for you, my commitment to legitimization, my desire to build a life that's clean and honest and worth living." He turned to her, taking both her hands. "I want that life to include you. Not someday, eventually, maybe. Definitely. With intention and planning and full commitment." Lena's heart stuttered. "Victor, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you. I'm saying that when you graduate, I want you to come back here not as a visitor, but as a partner in every sense. Help me run Refuge as a proper rehabilitation facility. Build an equine veterinary practice that serves the region. Create a life together that honors both your dreams and mine." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm saying I want forever with you, Lena Moreau. If you want forever with me." She couldn't speak for a moment, emotion closing her throat. Everything she'd wanted, the education, the career, the purpose, was finally within reach. And now Victor was offering something she hadn't dared to add to those dreams. Partnership, home, forever with someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. "Yes," she managed finally. "Yes to all of it. To forever and partnership and building something together. Yes." He kissed her then, tender and fierce and full of promise. And standing there at Refuge with horses breathing softly in the darkness and the future spreading out before them like an open road, Lena understood that she'd found something more valuable than safety or simplicity. She'd found someone worth choosing, worth the risk of visibility, worth fighting for even when the fight got complicated. The drive to Lyon the next morning felt both endless and too short. Victor followed in his own car, refusing to let her make the journey alone, and when they finally reached her new apartment, a small studio near the university, he helped her unpack with the same patient attention he brought to everything. "I'll visit as often as I can," he promised as the afternoon wore into evening. "Weekends when you're not drowning in coursework, video calls when visits aren't possible, whatever it takes to stay connected. And I'll come back when I can. Help at Refuge see the progress. Make sure you're not working yourself into exhaustion trying to finish legitimization alone." Lena held him tightly, memorizing the feel of his arms around her. 3 years isn't forever. We can do 3 years. "We can do 3 years," he agreed, "and then forever after that." He left as darkness fell, and Lena stood at her window watching his taillights disappear into Lyon traffic. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, too far from everything she'd built over the summer. But her veterinary textbooks were stacked on the desk, her class schedule was posted on the wall, and her dreams were finally, tangibly real. The first semester was brutal. Intensive coursework, demanding professors, competition from classmates who'd had traditional preparation instead of her patchwork education. Lena worked harder than she'd ever worked, studying until her eyes blurred and her back ached, determined to prove she belonged in the program. Victor called every night without fail, his voice an anchor in the chaos of new material and impossible expectations. He told her about progress at Refuge, about difficult negotiations with remaining coalition members, about small victories in the ongoing legitimization work. She told him about anatomy lessons and surgical technique demonstrations, and the professor who seemed determined to fail half the class. They visited when they could, Victor driving to Lyon on weekends when Lena's schedule allowed, Lena returning to Refuge during brief breaks. The visits were precious and too short, reminding them why they were enduring the distance while also highlighting how hard the separation was. But they made it work, through Lena's first semester and second, through Victor's careful dissolution of the last remaining criminal operations, through moments of doubt when the distance felt insurmountable and moments of certainty when their connection felt stronger than any physical separation. And then, 18 months into Lena's program, everything shifted one final time. She was in a surgical observation session when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Victor. "Call me when you can. Important news." "Not bad, just significant." Lena waited until the session ended, then stepped outside to call him back, her heart racing with residual anxiety that important news still sometimes triggered. "I'm done," Victor said without preamble. "The legitimization is complete. Every illegal operation has been shut down or converted. Every criminal connection has been severed. The Rinaldi family business is now entirely, completely, legally legitimate." Lena's knees went weak. She sat down hard on a bench outside the veterinary building. "You're sure? Completely sure?" "I'm sure. I spent the last 3 months working with auditors and attorneys to verify every aspect of the business. Nothing illegal remains. No smuggling, no money laundering, no protection rackets, no criminal activities of any kind." His voice carried exhausted triumph. "It's over, Lena. The fight is over. I won." "You won," she repeated, letting the reality sink in. "Victor, that's incredible. That's everything you've been working toward for years. 5 years. 5 years of systematic dismantling and rebuilding and fighting people who wanted to maintain the old ways. And it's finally done." He paused. "Which means something else is also possible now." "What?" "I can leave. The family business is established enough that it doesn't need me to run it day to day. I can hire management, step back from active leadership, build a different life that isn't defined by criminal legacy or coalition politics." Another pause. "I can come to Lyon, be with you while you finish your program instead of visiting on weekends, if you want that." Lena's heart stuttered. "You'd leave Nice, leave Refuge and everything you've built?" "Refuge will still be there. Sophia can manage it perfectly well without me hovering. And I'm not leaving forever, just relocating for the next 18 months while you finish school. After that, we figure out the future together." His voice was soft. "I've spent 5 years fighting to be free of my father's legacy. Now that I'm finally free, I want to use that freedom to be with you, properly with you, not separated by 3 hours of highway and busy schedules." Tears were streaming down Lena's face, though she was smiling. "Yes, absolutely yes. Come to Lyon. Be with me. Let's figure out what normal actually looks like for us. I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow, something near the university so you don't have to commute. Something with space for both of us to work without tripping over each other." He sounded lighter than she'd heard him in months. "This is happening, Lena. Our forever is starting." 2 months later, Victor moved to Lyon. He found an apartment with good light and proximity to campus, converted one room into an office for managing Refuge and family business remotely, and settled into supporting Lena's education with the same patient attention he'd brought to legitimization. Life became beautifully, impossibly normal. Lena studied while Victor worked. They cooked dinner together, arguing amiably about whose turn it was to do dishes. They explored Lyon on weekends, finding favorite restaurants and walking routes along the Rhone. They visited Refuge monthly, checking on the horses and ensuring Sophia had everything she needed. It was the life Lena had never quite let herself imagine: partnership without constant danger, love without the shadow of criminal legacy, future that felt secure instead of precarious. Victor was different too, lighter, without the weight of coalition politics, more willing to laugh and relax and simply exist without strategic calculation. But the transformation wasn't complete until one particular October evening, more than 2 years after Lena had started the veterinary program. They were at Refuge for the weekend, and Victor had asked her to come to the main pasture at sunset for reasons he wouldn't explain. When Lena arrived, she found him standing with Phoenix, the mare who'd survived poisoning, who'd been adopted out but had recently returned when her owners moved overseas and couldn't take her. "I've been thinking about your graduation," Victor said as Phoenix nuzzled his shoulder. "About what comes after. About the life we want to build. We've talked about this. I'll establish my veterinary practice here, help you run Refuge, continue the rehabilitation work with Sophia." Lena moved closer, stroking Phoenix's neck. "We build the life we've been planning. I want to build more than that." Victor's voice was quiet but intense. "I want to build a family, a real one, not the kind I grew up with, where business came before people and legacy mattered more than love. I want to build something honest and clean and good. With you." He pulled something from his pocket, a small box that made Lena's breath catch. "I know this isn't particularly romantic timing. I know you're focused on finishing school, and I'm still working through the final transitions from family business. But I also know I don't want to wait anymore." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was simple and beautiful, a single stone that caught the sunset light. "Lena Moreau, will you marry me? Will you build this new life with me, officially and permanently?" Lena looked at him. This man who'd fought for 5 years to escape criminal legacy, who'd protected her while teaching her to be strong, who'd supported her dreams while building his own, and felt every wall she'd ever built come crashing down. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't hiding behind a camera or borrowed confidence or careful professional distance. She was completely, vulnerably, dangerously seen by someone who understood what it meant to transform yourself into something better than your history suggested you could be. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to building a family and a life and everything we've been fighting for." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close and kissed her as Phoenix looked on with calm eyes, and the sunset painted everything gold and crimson, and Lena thought about how far she'd come from the girl who'd learned to be invisible. She'd learned instead to be seen, to be brave, to choose love even when love came with complications and risk, and the constant need to negotiate between dreams and reality. And standing there at Refuge with Victor's arms around her, and their future spreading out before them like the Mediterranean at dawn, Lena understood that transformation was always possible. For horses who'd been abused, for men trying to escape criminal legacy, for women who'd learned to hide but chose instead to be visible. For all of them, healing was possible. Love was possible. Forever was possible. They just had to be brave enough to choose it. Lena graduated 6 months later at the top of her class, officially becoming Dr. Lena Moreau, equine veterinarian. Victor was in the front row, cheering louder than anyone when she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. Marie came from the distillery, bringing champagne and genuine affection. Sophia drove from Refuge with updates on every horse, insisting Lena was needed immediately to handle a medical situation that turned out to be completely fabricated so she'd have an excuse to come home. Home. That's what Refuge had become. Not the resort where she'd photographed invisible moments, not the studio apartment with unreliable heating. Home was the rehabilitation estate where transformation happened, where Victor had built something beautiful from the ashes of his father's corruption, where they were creating a future worth everything they'd risked to achieve it. They married that summer in a small ceremony at Refuge, surrounded by horses and the few people who'd supported them through the complicated years. No families present, Victor's had fractured beyond repair after legitimization, and Lena's was too small and distant to include. But Marie stood as witness, and Sophia officiated with paperwork she'd gotten certified specifically for the occasion and Antonio from the refuge catered with the same love he'd shown when Victor had brought Lena there for their first honest conversation. It was simple and perfect and completely honest. Just like everything they'd built together. Dr. Lena Rinaldi established her veterinary practice 6 months after the wedding, specializing in equine rehabilitation and trauma recovery. Word spread quickly about the veterinarian who understood not just animal medicine, but animal psychology, who could heal horses that other vets had given up on, who had infinite patience for creatures who'd been hurt and needed time to trust again. The practice grew. Refuge expanded. Victor fully transitioned from family business leadership to managing the rehabilitation estate and supporting Lena's work. They hired staff, built additional stables, created a model program that other rehabilitation facilities began studying and replicating. And 5 years after Lena had first photographed Victor across a crowded resort terrace, they stood together in a completely transformed refuge, watching their daughter, 3-year-old Elena, named for Lena's grandmother, feed carrots to Phoenix with careful supervision. "She's got your eyes," Victor said softly, his arm around Lena's waist, "and your fearlessness with horses. She's got your patience and your ability to see clearly past surface appearances." Lena leaned into him, watching Elena laugh as Phoenix gently took the offered carrot. "She's got both of us. The best parts of both of us, without any of the legacy we had to fight against." His voice carried quiet wonder. "We did it, Lena. We built something clean, something good, something worth all the fighting and fear and risk." "We did," she agreed, "together." They'd started as two people who'd learned to be invisible. Victor, through strategic necessity in a criminal world. Lena, through survival instinct in spaces where she didn't belong. They'd found each other through recognition of shared invisibility, then chosen to make themselves visible to each other despite every risk that came with being truly seen. And from that choice, that brave, foolish, necessary choice, they'd built a life that honored both their dreams and their determination to be something better than their histories suggested they could be. Refuge stood as proof that transformation was possible, that criminal legacy could become legitimate healing, that abuse could become rehabilitation, that invisibility could become the most honest kind of visibility, that love, when chosen with full awareness of its complications and costs, could build futures worth every sacrifice required to achieve them. Lena watched her daughter with the mare who'd survived poisoning, watched Victor smile at both of them with unguarded joy, and felt the last traces of the invisible girl she'd been finally, completely dissolve. She was seen, fully seen, by her husband, her daughter, her patients, her community, herself. And being seen, choosing to be seen, fighting to be seen, building a life that celebrated visibility instead of hiding from it, was the most revolutionary act she'd ever committed. The girl who'd learned to be invisible had become a woman who taught others how to heal. The man who'd inherited criminal legacy had become a partner who built legitimate beauty. Together, they'd created proof that transformation was always possible for those brave enough to choose it. And standing there at Refuge with the Mediterranean sun warm on her face and her family around her and her future stretching out in all the directions she'd ever dreamed, Lena Moreau Rinaldi understood that she'd found something more valuable than safety or simplicity or any of the careful protections she'd once believed were necessary for survival. She'd found truth, partnership, love that didn't require invisibility to exist. She'd found home, and it was beautiful,